Okay, welcome to Law and Licensing. We're going to go ahead and get started. And let's see, if we can start over on this side. She's talking. If we can start on this side and everybody just introduce themselves, that would be great. I don't know her name. Could you introduce yourself? Sorry. Can you introduce yourself? No. Awesome.
Craig Frank from Utah Charge Network.
Okay.
Chris Blake, UAPCS.
Chris Van Tassel, also UAPCS.
Jay Blaine, Utah Association.
Terry Shoemaker, Utah School Superintendent Association, and USBA.
Okay, and then the back row.
Michael Clark.
Okay, thank you. Welcome. What? Oh. Yeah.
Bernie Quisenberry, legal counsel for the board.
Kevin John, internal audit for the board.
Okay. Thank you, and welcome to Law and Licensing. We'll go ahead and begin with our first item, 2.1, R277550, which is charter schools. This is a new rule that's come forth. And who's taking the lead?
I'll start.
Angie? Okay.
Yeah. So thank you. And Ben and I will kind of tag team on the providing support on all of the charter school authorizer rules. But before we start talking about all of them, I wanted to let the committee know or remind the committee that a couple of months back, you all requested that we hold a stakeholders meeting with interested parties before these rules came to Law and Licensing. We did meet with a number of individuals last week on Wednesday and received some good feedback. So when you see drafts 1 or and you see a draft 2 on those rules, on different rules throughout, the drafts number 2 are as a result of those stakeholder meetings or feedback we've received since we published those rules. So I wanted to let you know that stakeholder meeting did take place. Now I guess we can go ahead and start moving through 550. You'll see that the 3 repealed rules, 470, 481, and 482. I just wanted to make note that some of these 550, 551, 552 rules are incorporating what is currently in 470, 481, or 482. And so that is why later on you'll see that we're asking for a repeal of those 3 rules. So large sections of the language in 550 through 555 are currently found in our rules in 470, 481, and 482. So I thought that might be helpful background to keep in mind. And we have in some of the rules you'll see in the corner, it'll say formerly 470 or 481 or 482. So hopefully that'll help. All right. So I think, Ben, do you want to, we'll without objection from the chair, we'll start with the definitional section or rule. And just as a reminder, the definitions in this rule apply to all of the 550, like 551, 552, 553, et cetera, rules.
Okay. And are we in draft 2?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we just added draft 2 onto board docs, and so I've put the highlighted change up on the screen so you can see it. There was a recommendation we make a change to the definition of probation. That's the only change we made between the drafts on Rule 277-550. It deals with the definition of probation and changes the wording there a little bit. So that's what you've got there is just the definitions for the different charter rules.
And I guess if there are any questions, Ben or I would be happy to answer questions about the definition section.
Okay. Board Member Warner?
Okay, on your stakeholder groups, can you give us a little bit of an overview of were there any issues with definitions or anything like that? That they were,
The only definition that we receive feedback on is this definition that's showing the definition of probation.
Right.
The rest of the definitions, we had
We're okay.
no comments at
Okay.
all on any of them. So,
That's-
yep.
We don't have any public comment, so do we have any further discussion? If not, then I'll be seeking a motion. Board Member Belknap?
I do have one question, and this is not necessarily just for this rule, but are we very conscious of doing the authorizers, because just not one group are the authorizers, so do we always use authorizer and not the
We've
state?
tried to.
And so I think if anybody sees ones or catches that, we probably need to make sure we clean that up. Okay, I'd like to make a motion that we approve, that we approve our 277-500,
50.
550.
550 on draft
Draft
2
two.
on first reading and send to the board on second and final reading.
Okay, so the motion before us is to approve R277550 on first reading and send to the board for second and final reading. Any discussion to that motion?
And that's draft 2.
Draft 2, yes. Okay, seeing none, we'll go ahead and take a vote. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, motion passed unanimously. So now, item 2.2, R277551.
And just to reiterate, there is a draft 2, and so the changes from draft 1 to draft 2 were as a result of the stakeholder meeting that we had last week. So, Ben,
Okay.
do you want to just describe in
So,
general what?
551 is largely comes out of one of the original charter rules, and it largely is a different kind of miscellaneous rules that apply to charter schools, different requirements for charter schools, including transportation and some different things. And so that's what R277551 is. Let me pull it up here. I can put it on the screen. We reworked a few of these provisions in response to the stakeholder feedback to make them less rules for the charter schools themselves than to be rules for the authorizers and how they govern the charter schools with regards to some of these issues. This deals with transportation reporting requirements, information they have to provide to students and parents. That was a topic that we discussed quite a bit at the stakeholder meeting. Are there any questions on this rule?
So I do have one comment.
Okay.
So later on in the agenda, you'll see that we have our 277-100 coming before us as a result of the eliminating barriers request that we get more clear about the terms monitor, audit, review, evaluate throughout our rules. And Kevin John noticed that there are 2 references to terms like that in 551 that should be changed based on what's going to happen in Rule 100. And so there are 2 amendments that staff would recommend to this. So on line 29, the word audit is used, and that term should be changed to review. So on line 29, it should state, maintain equivalent documentation in its records, which may be subject to review by the superintendent. And then the second change will be on line 62, where it should now state, instead of saying monitoring and auditing by the board, and Kevin, correct me if I'm wrong, or let me know if you have any, if I'm stating this right, but instead it should read the board and to internal audit by the charter schools, right?
Or internal auditing and monitoring, it should not be clear on auditing
Oh, so should it be monitoring and internal audit?
or internal auditing or something like, just to be clear.
So,
So
and so
clear
you
up.
understand what we're going to do in R277100, if I may, Chair, is that whenever there's a reference to audit in the rules, we're going to move it to either internal or external audit to be clear, because there's clear
I
definitions
see.
and standards that
Okay.
apply to those, and so that's why we want to specify internal
Okay.
audit there.
So the motion then would just be to insert the word internal before auditing. So
that's-
it would then read the board and to monitoring and internal auditing by the board, right? So
Okay. Board Member Belknap?
Okay, on 62, let's just talk about that for a minute. Do we need to say by the board again if it's going to be our internal audit? I don't think you need to have by the board.
Is it our internal audit or is it, okay.
Established by the board.
I mean, it would technically be the superintendent, wouldn't it?
Well, don't we approve any audits before they're moved forward?
Yes, it probably would be technically the superintendent who would be doing the monitoring, although
And
not
then-
the internal audit.
Well,
That
it's
would be-
still
Right,
the
that would be-
superintendent.
Except, we're talking about accountability standards.
Designee.
So the standards are established by the board.
And then to monitoring by the superintendent and internal auditing.
It's a cumbersome sentence,
is.
yeah. He wants.
Come join us,
Is that
Kevin.
okay?
Yes.
Is that okay?
Here, you can.
Kevin John, internal audit with the state board. I think based on the definitions in R277100, when you refer to monitoring, inherently it's going to be by the superintendent. So the clarification would be on auditing, are we talking external audit or internal audit? So that's why that clarification would need to be
I
made.
would just cut off by the board and just leave it.
Right.
Definition.
Right.
So I think for that reason, it might be redundant. But
Oh. So the board is only attached to the internal auditing. So it's monitoring, which includes the superintendent, and internal auditing by the board.
yes, that's,
I think you could
it'd be
even
work.
strike by the board.
But you
Just-
could, I agree. with
Yeah,
that.
okay. So then the amendment could be that then the lines read the board and to monitoring and internal auditing, period.
Yeah. I got it, Chair.
I've written it down.
Okay.
I'm trying to remember it all.
And then, may I follow up?
Yes.
Thank you. Also, I've had some question asked about what really needs to be on a website, and I'm not sure that I have the verbiage to express it. I don't know if anyone's asked to speak to this, have they?
Is the website in the 551?
Yes,
It
it's
is.
section 5. We had a lot of discussion about this in the stakeholder meeting. A lot of the language that's in section 5 is already required by statute. I think most of the people at our stakeholder group were pretty satisfied with what we had after that discussion, but a lot of that is already required in statute, isn't it?
It is, and also we received feedback
It's a
from,
different rule, 550.
we received feedback from the State Charter School Board that it is helpful for them to have all of these requirements in one place to direct a new charter school, because it's overwhelming sometimes for brand new, groups who are applying to be charter schools to look throughout the whole code to figure out what they should have on their website. And so after quite a lengthy discussion, I would say
Yeah.
probably at least 30 minutes
We spent
or
more time on this than just
probably
anything else.
anything in our stakeholders group. This was the language we had agreed to, so.
Just to follow up on that too, it's interesting because this is what's also required in traditional schools, and so it's not that it's that much different. Okay, thank you, Chair.
Okay. We don't have any public comment on this rule. So if there's no further discussion by board members, then I'll seek a motion. And Angie, do we need to move to adopt the rule first and then make the amendments, right?
You should
Yeah.
make the,
You
you make the amendments, then you move. to
Or
adopt.
can we?
You could,
Okay.
you could make the amendments to draft 2 and then do the final adoption of draft 2 with amendments.
Okay. Board member Belknap?
I'm going to throw it all in, and then you can decide.
That works.
Okay, I'd like to make a motion that we approve our 277551, draft 2 with these amendments. Line 29, change audit to review. Line 62 to include internal auditing and take off by the board. And send it to the board for first reading and ask for second and final reading.
Okay, so the motion before us is to adopt R277551, I'm just going to say as amended, on draft 2 on first reading, and send to the board on second and final reading, for approval on second and final reading. There we go. Okay, any discussion to that motion? Okay, all in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion passed unanimously. Okay, item 2.3, R277552, charter school timelines and approval process.
So this is the rule that discusses essentially what we've proposed doing here is requiring that each charter school authorizer create a process that would be subject to approval by the board. And then after that approval, that process is approved, they can then follow that process when they want to adopt new charter schools. So we've outlined those procedures here, kind of the timelines involved in that, and we'll be happy to answer any questions that you have on this rule. Carol's making faces and making
No,
me
I
nervous.
just figured that if Jennifer's smiling, then we're okay.
Chair, if I may.
Yes.
Audit is mentioned twice here in the rule as well. I just wanted to verify that it's
What
according.
line?
Let's see. The first one is on 165. I just want to make sure that we're in.
Right, do we need
That
to
would be
clarify
appropriate
that?
there.
That's appropriate
Okay.
there, and as
In that
well
context,
as
yes.
219. Is that appropriate as well? Just wanted to verify.
Yes, that wouldn't be referring to the board auditing, that would be
Okay, thank
a
you.
little different.
Where is the word used? Can you?
165 and 219. It refers to audited financial statements.
Those would be appropriate.
Yes.
Okay.
Thanks, though.
Okay. Any further discussion?
A motion
Yep, Board Member Warner?
that we approve R277553 on
552.
552.
Draft
Oh, I
two.
already put a check mark on. Oh, wait, never mind, stop. We have somebody that raised their hand. That I
Oh.
don't know if I think I'd rather wait.
You know what, I didn't flip my page. Sorry. There is public comment. Thank you, Royce. Sorry about that.
Thank you for crossing your eyes and letting
My
us
bad.
know.
Come on up.
He behaved himself and raised his
He
hand.
did,
We were
and
in
thank you for
class.
catching it. Daryl.
Got out of the corner of my eye.
Okay, go ahead,
Good morning.
Royce.
Royce Van Tassel, Utah Association of Public Charter Schools. We appreciate all of the feedback that we've been able to have and provide with both Ben and Angie, your staff. I think the concern that we've articulated before, in which we continue to be concerned about, is on, where is it here? Sorry, I thought I just had it open. Lines 98 and 99. And this, in here, you're talking about a new school that is going to open, and you want them to have their budgeted revenue. So they don't know what their enrollment actually is going to be, but they want to set an actual percentage, a cap on how much they can spend on their facility cost. And the challenge, of course, is that this is a projection number. Let's say you've built a school anticipating that you're going to have 500 students in year one, and lo and behold, you end up with 400. And all of a sudden, that budgeted number is well in excess of what this standard that has been would be set by the superintendent may look like. It's not clear what the remedy for that would be. It seems unlikely that you would say, we're going to close this school or we're going to delay opening. Now, we do see, certainly the most active authorizer, the State Charter School Board, does keep a close watch as a school is moving through its process and saying, where are you in the number of students that have enrolled? And if they're looking at it and saying, you're unlikely to be able to enroll enough, let's say by June, you've got some idea of who's actually enrolled, they may say, we're going to ask you to delay opening a year because you need at least 150 or at least 200 students to break even. But that number is inevitably going to be arbitrary. We've had, I know that Superintendent Jones feels very strongly and understandably that you want dollars to be going into the classroom, not into the building of that classroom. But it is, there are factors here that are beyond the control of an LEA. And you're making choices about what, each school is going to make a different set of choices about what's most important to them, and setting a single statewide number that says we're not going to go above that does seem problematic. I fully understand, and an authorizer probably does want to look on a case-by-case basis and say, how are these things working? But to set a single number seems
Well, I have a
problematic.
Yes.
Would it be better if it was if it said approved by the authorizer?
Again, the challenge here would be
It would be up between the authorizer and the.
and if you're going to set a single number, I think that you're going to have some challenge. And so authorizer S says it's going to be 18%, and authorizer Y says it's going to be 22%.
Gotcha. Okay.
You want to have authorizers that have a portfolio, and within that portfolio, some of the schools are going to be comfortable with their value choices at 18%, and others are going to say, we're looking at how we're going to budget this, and we think that 23% is better, or some, heaven forbid, may say 30%. That's a conversation that they should have, but to have a single number that's going to govern that entire portfolio seems at best problematic.
Okay. Board Member Belknap?
I read this totally different, right? Because it's not asking for, it's asking for you to turn this in.
Right.
To be compliant with what's required. I don't see where there's an imbalance. You're going to have to help me, because I don't see where there's an imbalance with what they've turned in, but that they have turned it in here.
I guess I'm not sure the distinction you're drawing between what's...
It says, okay, let me just read this out loud and maybe I'll see it different, okay? The board may impose corrective action against a charter school for failure to provide financial and statistical information
Where are you at?
required by law.
Where are you?
I'm on lines 98 and 99.
You're reading the wrong thing. I think.
I'm going, Royce, what is wrong with this?
See, read this. 98, 99.
Yeah, 9899 is.
Okay, I'll get on the right lines.
Can I say
Natalie,
something?
you might want to come.
Yeah, I know Ben needed to say something, and Angie, so whichever
So
one wants
first,
to go
to
first.
some extent, I think that what Board Member
Sorry,
Belknap
Roy.
is stating still is somewhat true, because really this is about the authorizer certifying in writing that that prior to the school's first operational year, that the charter school's budgeted facility expenditures do not exceed a percentage approved by the superintendent of the charter school's budget. Now, we talked about this during the stakeholder meeting, and there was a request that this be a little more specific, either through a formula or through a percentage, and we were hoping that we might get to that point by today, and we haven't. So, anyway, did you have something?
I was just going to, that was where I was going, that I think we're forthcoming would be a more specific information from finance.
So, yes, so if the committee doesn't feel comfortable moving forward with this provision without that specificity in it, I did speak with Deputy Superintendent Jones, and he felt okay with that being stricken for now, and we can come back later and add it back in. Or if people want to leave it in for now and see if within the next month we could come up with a percentage, we could either wait until then, or we could reinsert it back in through amendment next month. I think that I understand, and staff recognizes that some stakeholders might feel more comfortable if there was an actual percentage number in here, and or a formula, that because sometimes the percentages may be greater depending on if the budget's smaller, and if the budget's larger, it may be a smaller percentage. So just wanted to give you that feedback. This was an issue raised at the stakeholder meeting, and we, meaning staff, recognize that there may be some desire for a little more clarity or an actual percentage or formula. Am I correct, Natalie?
Okay, Board Member Brittany Cummins.
Sorry, I was late. So I think a formula would be more beneficial than an actual percentage, because then it would be based on, the inputs, which are going to be different for every charter school, right? Because if you have a small charter school, obviously your building expenses are going to be a larger percentage than a larger school that has higher enrollment options, right? Just to build a roof costs more for, anyways, just it's gonna be different. But I guess it goes. Royce brought up the one question of the what if, right? And so when you submit a budget during your application process, and then the reality of what you see day one sometimes differ. Sometimes your enrollment is higher, sometimes it's lower. And so I guess the question is, so state funds begin to be released in July, prior to the school actually starting in mid-August. And so all of these things have to be in place for the money to start flowing. And so I guess the question is you get your count on October 1, your official count, so what if? So is this just saying that our budget is under control? We know we're still basing on our general projections for enrollment. We're probably getting there, and so here's our current budget where we're seeing this now. And so is that all this is saying, here's our snapshot right now, and so money will start to flow based on the snapshot of this moment? Or is this saying that this has some impact later in the what if scenario, things change or are different on October 1 than they were on July 1?
Natalie Grange, Assistant Superintendent of Financial Operations. I apologize, I heard about half the question, but I think the question that you asked is this something that will be measured at the beginning when we establish a school with a percentage, or will it be measured every year as we're adjusting October 1 headcounts? Is that sort of? Okay. That's a question I want to answer.
But I think that's important to go there eventually, because I'm understanding that this is just this is the pre-flow, right? This is before the money starts coming to this charter school at its opening date. Is that correct?
My understanding in the conversations that we've had so far is it might even be before that. It would be as we're evaluating an LEA's abilities to open, to sustain their operations, because this is before the school's even open.
Right.
We've had lots of conversations about, I think, both pieces, and I haven't been part of all of them. So that's the difficult
then
part.
I'm extra confused, because then we're confusing the application process. So you have an application and you have an approval, right? So they would have been, by this time, if I'm understanding correctly, already approved by the state charter or their authorizer, right? And so then this is under 3. It says a charter school may receive state funds beginning on June 30th. So this is like that click that says here money is going to start to go out to this charter school, and then these are the conditions. Am I reading that correctly? That these are the conditions to hit the button that says here money's starting to go here.
Right, and I believe that, as I understand it in the meetings that I've been in, usually when we're approving or authorizing schools, the facilities costs aren't part of that, because obviously a school hasn't been built, an LEA doesn't have their facility, and so I think the intent was to establish a guideline of some percentage and then ensure that the LEA stayed with that percentage when they're ready to open. Is that how you felt it was, Angie? Okay.
Yeah, okay, so this is after they've been authorized, and this is just saying now we still feel comfortable sending money to you because things are still going as planned. And so what you're saying, this is a single snapshot taken on June 15th or wherever it happens prior to the money going that says you're still on track for your budget, right? You're still, but what if, like because you don't always have a guarantee that of your enrollment on June 15th when you're opening, your school starts on August 15th, right? So you don't always have your exact number. So is this just a snapshot of, yep, things are going well, and so there isn't a what if? So if on October 1st your enrollment is lower and that somehow that affects that formula, and so now all of a sudden the state board has the ability to cut funding?
Right.
Or change it, right? And so that's the question.
The way that it worked in my mind, which might not be the way it worked in everyone's mind, is that we would have some kind of percentage of your budget. So your budget's going to fluctuate with your head counts, right? And so it wouldn't be you have to, in my mind at least, and I'm not the one making the final decision, we wouldn't say, oh, you don't have a certain number of students, you can't open. It would be some kind of a formula that floats with your head count so that it would adjust if your numbers came in lower.
Okay, Angie?
I might add something that we actually changed in the stakeholder meeting the term actual to budgeted. So this really actually would be before the school has started school. It's during their pre-operational year. And I'll tell you the philosophy of why this was requested. So this would be about at that one point, June 30th. So again, the students aren't actually probably going to start receiving instruction until like August 15th or something. This is their budgeted, what they anticipate will be their maintenance and operation costs versus their facility costs, that just before they're about to start providing instruction. And the reason we put this in here versus then saying, oh, August 15th, you said you were going to have 200 students and you only had 150, now you can't move forward, we're going to take money away. That's not what's going to happen here. It's making sure that on June 30th, the 2 months before they start instruction, they're still on track. And this was the idea. Part of what we've seen through successful charter schools has been often the reason why charter schools have closed is because of their financial problems. It's usually been because they overextended on their facility or on something that they couldn't, their fixed costs. I guess that's the word I'm trying to look for. They overextended themselves on their fixed costs. And so then we're trying to see before they actually have contact with students and they start receiving the WPU that they're not already set up for failure. Part of this comes from input that we've heard from the state treasurer, who worries that, again, there are charter schools that are starting with a losing battle. So this is trying to get at that. We were trying to get a percentage that says, if you only have 25% of your costs dedicated to facilities, you're more likely to be successful in the long term than if 50% of your costs are in facilities. So this because now we are not going to be having the same touch points with these schools, there is a desire to make sure that the schools aren't going to just be starting off with a failing position, that they've overextended with the fixed costs. So, right?
Mm-hmm. Okay. Board Member Brittany Cummins, and then Board Member Warner, did you still have something?
Oh, no, is mine back on? I got my question answered.
Okay.
So this is the first place I think it's in the rule where a facility is already underway by June 30th, right? And so I guess my question is this too late to ask this question and to say we're not going to send flows, because all of a sudden it's like, oh, wait a second, your facility costs are too high compared to your budget. And so I'm just wondering, is there an intent that this question is understood and asked way at the very beginning of the process?
Yes. Can I answer that?
Yeah.
That is exactly the point, is if we put it at this June 30th point, that they will know that 2 years before when they start working with whoever they're going to lease or buy their building from. And it helps them determine as they're starting their charter school application whether they will buy a building or lease it and how expensive those costs should be. So the idea is that this will be something that the charter school applicant, as well as anybody who's going to be working with or maybe providing services to that charter applicant will know that that's the standard that they're going to be held to on June 30th. So,
I'm wondering if maybe could we hold the rule? I mean, is there a rush to pass this out? If there's not, if we could hold the rule or strike that part out and have you, would that be
I would strike
better?
it out and let it move forward. That would be the preference. Don't hold it.
And then we work on it or something?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Staff
Member
is-
Belknap?
Chair, would it be okay if we had Jennifer Lambert come up? Because I want to ask her a couple of questions about this. Would that be okay, Chair?
Yes. Jennifer?
Sorry, Jen, I was trying to get your eye to let you know I was going to do that.
In the back.
You were trying to hide. Okay,
Jen-
sorry.
Jennifer Lambert, Executive Director for the State Charter School Board.
So it's okay if I
Yeah.
Thank you. So I guess I have a couple of questions. How does this change your process that you're doing now as one of the big authorizers, almost one? And what do you think should happen here? I'm curious.
So if we're talking about these specific elements, right now we don't give a certification to you or to your staff about these things. We do have a readiness to open checklist that we go through. We do not look at the facility costs like this is asking us to, so we would add that in. But we would just merge this into our readiness to open review that we do, and then we would certify to the superintendent that these elements have been met.
So I'm wondering if we need to do something around that way, that it's already, because I agree with Brittany that by this point, we're a little late. If the next day you say you're closing, kids are already.
If I can point out something, if you look, and I think it's on it's, if you go back to that area, I think it was, what lines were it? Oh, it's after.
The charge government has designated executive director of business? No.
So, yes, you're looking at where it's talking about enrollment, 109H. So on H, you are talking about the charter school enrollment, and that's what a lot of these discussions we're getting at. You're already asking the authorizer to certify and look at, are they on track to be able to get a sufficient enrollment to be able to exist? It was my understanding that what we're talking about in the facility and what was requested by some of your staff members on this is that it would, you don't have charter schools getting into agreements that they couldn't ever possibly long-term sustain. So that it isn't, well, they aren't on track to get the enrollment to be able to fund a facility. It's that they got into a contract with the facility that even if they got their full enrollment, it's going to kill them, especially long-term. That was my understanding of the purpose behind that. Again, I'm rather ambivalent on it because I think that there will be so many loopholes that it won't necessarily be of value. The one value that I could see is it might give charter schools more clout when they're negotiating those contracts to begin with. They say that, well, it's got to be within this certain percentage, that might be able to give them some strength. However, reality, I don't know if that would actually happen.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay, thank you. Yeah, Board Member Brittany Cummins.
I don't have a question on this line. Is it okay if I ask another question from earlier in the rule? Okay. On line 51, where it's talking about the process of a charter school authorizer, it says the authorizer shall maintain the original charter agreement, and I'm just curious about the word original and what that means.
What line are you at?
I don't realize I told a joke. It's so funny.
This
has received a lot of
51.
comments. That was the attorney and me trying to distinguish the original charter agreement from a copy of the charter agreement. Essentially, I think you could leave it, you could include it, or I don't think it would be Big problem if you just put the charter agreement.
Yeah, we could take out the word
Okay.
original.
Because my only concern is if it amends, if a charter gets amended over time, does that mean that their authorizer only maintains the original? No.
So there would
so it
still
just-
be an original of the amended
Original.
agreement would be.
Yeah.
Okay.
If it creates more confusion, which it seems like it might be, because
Okay.
we could just take out original, and then I think the rest of it would be fine.
Okay.
If you'd like to make that motion. I mean,
Okay, yeah.
So
Can
that's
I move that we
What?
remove the word original on line 51.
Natalie's suggesting using the word binding instead of original.
oh, yeah. Yeah, binding is good. Or
Okay.
controlling.
After.
Yes.
Can I make a comment?
Yes.
So, to get to the problem that we're trying to solve, and I don't remember names or frequencies, but I know in the past we've had some charters who have modified their agreement and felt like their agreement would trump the one that the charter board had when the charter board didn't know that something had been changed. And sometimes the changes are minor. There's different categories of changes that I think charters are able to make. So I think that our intent with this line is that the official one that would be determined or used for compliance purposes would be the one held by the authorizer. Is that accurate? Where'd you go?
Yes.
Official could be another word.
Or, or yeah, or
So are we going to,
is later, yeah.
so then we would strike original?
Sorry. I move that we, on line 51, strike the word original and insert the word official. Because original to me means first.
Right.
I know there's so many.
Okay, so the motion before the board is on line 51 to strike the word original and add official.
Do you want to take official out then on 52? I don't know if that's redundant. I would, so do you see where 52? We
Yes.
do have official. So maybe we put it above and then just take it off below?
Yeah.
So the motion could be to replace the word original with official, and then strike the commas and the word official on line 52.
Okay. So that's the motion before us. I'm not going to repeat that. I hope you got that.
I did.
Okay. Any discussion to that motion? Okay, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Okay, that motion passed. Any other motions?
Sorry.
Yes.
On line 109 and 110, this is where, we're going back to the certification process, right? No, right? So this is certifying that they're ready to receive money. And the charter schools enrollment is on track to be sufficient to meet the school's financial obligations. And so I'm just curious what on track means, and who's going to make that decision as to whether or not it's on track or not, because it's kind of a subjective
I think it would be for the authorizer to make that decision because they're the one that's certifying that.
The authorizer would have that authority to say, yes, we believe that the school is on track, and they could check either the efforts versus enrollment and what's going on with that school.
Should we add as determined by the authorizer, or is that
Is that implicit?
The authorizer is already certifying it, so.
Okay.
Okay.
Natalie, do you agree with that? Ish? Okay.
Okay, and then I have a motion, unless somebody else has a motion. I was just going to move that we strike 98 through 100 as said by staff to work on better language, maybe a formula or something. And then any discussion to that motion? Board Member Belknap?
Are you going to want them to bring that back before board meeting? Or,
Yes.
I would just say if staff has a recommendation for amended language on that,
Okay.
we'll bring it to the chair by next month, but otherwise,
We'll just strike it? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so, yes. Oh, okay. Then we'll go ahead and vote. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, motion passed unanimously. Board Member Brittany Cummins.
Okay, so I have some questions in, sorry, I always lose where it's related to. So charter school expansion requests, line 152 to 154. 152 to 154. So this is a charter schools applied for an expansion of some kind, and this is the authorizer making a decision, right? And it says that they can give preference to schools that have successfully operated for 3 years or more. So in my head, when I use the word preference, I'm comparing two things, and one thing gets chosen over another. And so a lot of times when, please correct my vocabulary if I'm misunderstanding that word, and so I guess my question is, a lot of times schools come forward and they're not being compared. It's just a decision for that school. Is preference used that way as well? Like I said, so in this decision-making process, are you giving weight to these things? And so preference just, in my head, just means...
I think it was, but I think it's a good point. Is there a better word? Sorry, just...
You might just want to stay up here.
If this language was pulled from the old rule, in the past there was a cap on the number of charter schools or the number of charter school students that could be added every year. That cap was removed years ago, and so some of the language from the old rules might still kind of reflect that. And that, I think, as you're describing preference where you pick one over the other, like I don't think they really do that. I mean, at this point, I think the state board is deciding on granting satellites as to whether they feel a charter school is, I don't want to say earned it, but whether it's a good idea and a good fit for the school and a good fit for students.
So we could strike that preference clause and it wouldn't be problematic.
So would we need to strike out 155 through 157 or change the word?
Because you want to have a look at,
I think you could just strike giving preference for the end of that paragraph and still say they're going to look at how long they've operated successfully and making the
Meeting the
determination.
charter agreement, yeah.
They can look at performance data and assessment.
Yeah. So can I make a motion? I move that we strike out, comma, giving preference to schools that have been successfully operated for 3 years or more.
Okay, so the motion before us is to strike out on line 155, comma.
153 and 154.
Yes, line 153 and 154, striking out, comma, giving preference to schools that have been successfully operated for 3 years or more. And the word preference is used again in 156, so I don't know if we need to strike it there too. Yes.
I actually remember this language. We actually added it not that long ago. And it was after we had an administrative rules meeting where there was the board, this committee actually, as we were reviewing expansion requests, oftentimes the committee's stated kind of standard was, well, if a school hasn't been successfully operating for 3 years, or if they're academic, so if they had a D, we would say no, they need to have been successfully running with a good academic history for 3 years. And so that's why it was put in here. Now that the roles are changing, because the board is no longer going to be, I don't believe, we are no longer going to be essentially saying yes or no to these satellite schools now. Or do we on the expansions? I forget.
It would be the authorizer.
Yeah, it's the authorizer. So I don't know if, based on that history, because now those requests aren't going to be coming to this committee for approval, that used to be kind of I don't know if buffer is the right word, but it was a standard that then the authorizers knew the law and licensing committee was going to hold. So do we want now, since the law and licensing committee is not going to have the opportunity to say, you're a D school, or you've been a D school for the last 2 years, we don't think you're ready to have a satellite or to add more students or more grades. Or you've only been successfully operating for 1 year, maybe you're not ready. So do you as a board want to codify that in some way and set the expectation that although now the Law and Licensing Committee and the board is no longer going to kind of implied in an uncodified way hold that standard, and that was partially because we generally don't govern the board's decisions through our rules. Do you want to set that standard for the authorizers and have them maybe, you could actually say when considering whether to approve a charter school's request for an expansion, you could actually state an authorizer may not approve a request for expansion unless or until they've had a C or a B or above, you know, for the academics, that's the last 3 years, or they've been in successful operation for at least 2 or 3 years. So you could change that standard. That's all I'm saying, to meet the same purpose.
Okay. We'll go. Did you have something on top of that?
Yeah.
Okay.
I was just going to indicate that if you go back to 4, it actually says an authorizer shall consider. And I guess the way that I had read this and had seen it in action in the past is that, you know, if we want to have all authorizers considering the same thing, so every authorizer is effectively, at least has the same set of standards, consistency. I think in the past the boards have said, oh, you haven't been open for 3 years. No. Or sometimes an initial application comes in with a request for a satellite already. And I think that they said no to that one too. And so, you know, if you want to have this be part of the consideration, which I think was the intent of this section, then I wouldn't strike the that have been successfully operated. I think what's confusing is the give preference, right? And so I think if we want them to consider, we could just say consider, you know, consider their track record over 3 years, or if they've been successful, or, you know, one of the things that I can remember is someone asking for a satellite and they hadn't even been open a year. So there was nothing for the board to evaluate. They didn't have assessment scores, they didn't have enrollment, they didn't have anything, no financial performance, because the school hadn't been open for a whole year. And that was one of the bases that they made that decision.
Okay. Angie?
The other thing I just want you to consider is if we don't put something in here that says an authorizer can consider these things, there could be schools that say you can't deny our application based on the fact that we've only been in operation for 1 year. You can't deny our application because we're an F school. So we also have to realize that some of what we're putting in here gives the authorizer some more backing, or it shields them from either due process concerns or from somebody saying you don't have the legal right to deny this. And one thing you could do in here, which was another option back when we discussed this with the Administrative Rules Committee, is just explicitly state that an authorizer may not approve an expansion request if the charter school, you know, is an F school, or they have, you know, they've only been in successful operation for 2 years or less or something. So just consider that also about why that language is in here and whether or not you may want to propose different language.
Now, there is a motion. Did you want to amend that motion, Board Member Brittany Cummins, based on?
No,
I don't even
but I have
remember
some
that
other thoughts.
motion.
I have some thoughts of what's already in there. So can I share that, or discuss?
Let's have Lisa, and then we'll go, because it seems.
Just thinking out loud here, with the grading system, we changed the report card yesterday. So are we going to, if we're going to suggest maybe codifying this, would we be willing to expand to include not just the grading based on, you know, because there are many schools that are succeeding but not to the standards of the assessments, right? But there are other assessments that they're taking that are having great results. So I think we need to expand that criteria a little bit and not be so narrow. If we do go
Maybe
that
to
route.
match what we did with the
Yeah.
school grading. Brittany?
Does Laura?
Go ahead.
Oh,
Okay.
Laura?
I do have some.
Okay. So if you read down, so if you look at the line 151 says shall consider, right? So as Natalie pointed out, they have to consider the following things. One is time, right? And so if we are requiring that they consider time. So an application that comes in with a desire for an expansion automatically would be excluded because they have no time, right? And so that would take care of that. They have to show academic performance data. You do not get academic performance data until at least 1 year, sometimes 2, and so you can't show trend data until after 2 years of performance. You have to show, and so under academic data, you have to show giving, so academic data of students at the charter school, and I is the academic goals established by the charter school's charter agreement. And so those goals are fairly specific under the current Exhibit A of a charter agreement. They have to show trends over time. And so if you can't show this after a year, obviously you don't have the data to show. And so there's already embedded in the language of the rule time and data and information. And so instead of putting a year and saying, oh, I've been in operation for 3 years, so I should get this expansion, right? You're already saying you have to be in operation for several years in order to show me that you are fulfilling your goals, you're meeting the standards that you established in your charter agreement, and time. It would be implicit in any of those things. And so if we were to strike what is already in the motion and also strike giving preference to school, the next one,
Then
giving preference to
153.
charter schools whose students are performing on standardized tests or assessments, because that's also in the Exhibit A. You have to show progress on things that are established in your goals, and those include statewide standardized tests. And so I would say we could strike both of those lines that are talking about preference and then just leave it as far as the goals, the charter agreement, showing time spent. So.
Okay, and then Board Member Belknap, or would you like to?
It actually goes right back to you.
Okay.
So my question would be, I have a concern, and I'd need a little bit of clarity on this. I realize that all of the new charters have these things, but what about the old ones that were written 20 years ago? Do we have that, Jennifer? We don't. They don't have those requirements in there.
Could we add them?
They didn't. Isn't that true?
But if it's working, why are we?
So then. Okay, so then this would be my question then on that, if chair's okay.
Yeah.
So I guess then my question on that would also be, do these rules trump the contract? So it could be an imbalance, so that would be my
And
question
then what would
as
we
well.
do?
Yeah, so.
So, and it actually says it in the contract, and whether it says it or not, statute trumps rule and rule trumps the contract. So
That
yes.
would help that, because I know some of the first contracts.
Okay.
That they were nothing, not this big.
The vast majority of the
Have
charter
revamped.
school contracts that we have do have some semblance of goals in there. Some of the goals actually are too high. And so in some ways, those become non-goals as well, because if they're so high, then yeah. But it is something that we're working towards fixing. But I don't know if this would change that. I think that this just are things that we understand you have in the past looked at when you're looking at the expansions. And so now it's just you're putting in rule that you're asking to make sure that the authorizers would look at those things.
Follow up?
Yes.
So Jennifer, when you're looking at this, would you say as one of the authorizers, when it says the authorizer shall consider the following, would you feel like you have to look at all these things in making that decision?
Correct, we'd have to look at them, but there's sometimes cases where you would make exceptions. So for example, if a charter school, they just find that they are overwhelmingly overwhelmed with the demand. And so they need to get an expansion earlier than within, waiting the 3 years. We would take that into consideration if they are successful in other areas. And so, but it allows the authorizer to make circumstantial decisions based on, the specific knowledge of that situation.
Wouldn't that be nice if all our schools had to do that?
Okay, Angie?
So when you, if you approve the motion that Board Member Cummins suggested, B is a little different than A because there are two sub-I and two little I. So what I would change, instead of saying giving preference to charter schools with students who are performing on standardized assessments at or above, I would instead say, comma, including whether the charter school is performing or whether the charter school students are performing at or above. And then that way, because you still have the academic goals that were established in their charter agreement and the average academic performance of their peers, essentially. So you'd need to put something in there because of the little I and the two little I. So, and I could read that again if you wanted me to stay.
We followed you.
Okay.
Okay, so any other discussion to that? If not, Board Member Brittany Cummins?
Oh, sorry.
There is a motion already, so we might need to amend that motion.
I just want to amend. I'd like to amend the motion to do what Angie said on line 156. So taking out the word preference and.
Okay. I'm going to read it so that we have it on record. Okay, so we're going to amend the motion. Oh, goodness. To strike out on line 153, giving preference to schools, that whole line. And on line, to the end of line 154, and then striking out the end of 155, giving, and then all of 156 and 157, and inserting, comma, including whether the charter school is performing at or above, colon. Okay, that's the motion before us. Any discussion to that motion? Yes, Board Member Brittany
So we
Cummins.
struck out performing on standardized assessments. So it's just performing, and then it's based on academic goals and averages, which is basically implies the testing data.
For the two, it does.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Interesting because just talking to Jennifer, sidebar here, I appreciate Brittany's comment that you don't have trend data till after this, at least the second year, the third year. But this makes it very clear if you put a 3-year here, it gives them a little bit of teeth to hold on to.
The 3-year.
And so would you be willing to amend and somewhere include a 3-year trend data or a 2+ trend data or something?
Yes.
So my question then goes back to the ability to be flexible within that 3 years. So if you're considering 3 years of trend data, but if you have a charter school in year 2 that has 500 people and they just want to expand a few people in each grade, right? And so it gives them the flexibility to consider that 3-year mark, but also to have the flexibility to approve an expansion as they see necessary within
I think that's
that
where
3
the
years.
preference came. I think that's why the word preference was there.
Well, I think the
That
word
would be
consider
compared
provides that flexibility within those, that they have to look at all of these things.
Yes.
They're required, they shall,
Right.
use these criteria, but the word consider gives them enough flexibility to make decisions within that criteria.
May I ask, Chris?
Yes.
Do you feel like that would, if we put the 3 years, still give you that flexibility?
Yes, I think authorizers do need that flexibility. And I think as authorizers, we are looking very carefully. We want our schools to be successful as much, if not more, than what you do. And so we're going to be looking at these things. We just know in the past that this has been a very important point to this committee, that we felt like we couldn't even bring someone if they weren't in existence for at least 3 years. And so this is good feedback that you're allowing us to consider other and be flexible on that. But I do think that with what you've explained, that gives enough backing to meet what your the expectations, but to allow for some other circumstances.
So is that okay? Yeah.
Okay. So then amend the motion to add on line 155, 3 years of academic performance data of the students at the charter school. Okay. Any further discussion? Yes.
Sorry, I just have a question. If you, correct me if I'm wrong, but if you're asking for 3 years of performance data, that's actually almost 4 year, you're on your 4th year. So if we were to do 2 years of, at
Yeah,
least 2
2.
years of performance data, then that gives you the teeth, sorry, that allows you to.
Oh my goodness. Amend 3 to 2. Can we just vote now? I'm really losing track. Okay, so all in favor of that motion?
That one.
That, what I said, all of that? Aye. Okay. Do you want me to read it to make sure that we are, well, I'm going to have Angie read it.
So what you just voted on and approved, on lines 152 through 154, we will be striking everything after agreement. So comma, giving preference to schools that have been successfully operated for 3 years or more will be taken out. And then for 155 through 157, it will now read, B, 2 years of academic performance data of the students at the charter school, comma, including whether the charter school is performing at or above, colon, and then you'll have little I and 2 little I on 158 through 160 will stay the same.
Okay. Thank you, Jennifer. Okay, any other discussion? If not, then I'm going to seek a yes,
Sorry.
Angie.
So, and I apologize that I didn't think of this until right now, well, about 45 minutes ago, but it's on lines 103 through 107, where we want to make sure, and the language that's currently in there says, and can you go to that, Ben, so people can see what it currently states? It's about the charter school hiring an executive director and a business administrator. And then we wanted to state that we wanted to make it clear, because there were questions about whether or not they actually had to hire somebody that's kind of hired by the nonprofit and a nonprofit employee, or whether they could contract. And so because we're unsure, and I don't want to tie this rule's fate to 417, I thought it might be helpful if we amend lines 103 through 108. And I've actually drafted what it would look like. So Ben, if you could hop off, then I will hop on. It would just be taking out the words. I think it'll just be helpful if everybody can see what it looks like. It's just more general about the charter school having policies about their supervision of contract employees versus making them necessarily comply with 417. If they have to comply with 417, 417 will require them to comply with it, but I don't want to necessarily tie 417 here. So just one moment, and it's taking a second. So I apologize, 3572. 3527, thank you. So now what I would recommend the language stating on 103 through 108 is that the charter school has hired an executive director and a business administrator, which could be employees of the actual charter school, or the charter school governing board has designated an executive director and business administrator who is or I guess it should be who are, or I think
employees.
Or contract employees, and that could be one or the other. And the charter school governing board has established policies regarding the charter school's supervision of the charter school's contract employees. So that could be they have a contract, they have some policies that state, and so that in lieu of it being 417, it would just be in general that they have policies regarding their oversight of their contract employees.
Does it need to be contract employees, or do you want it to be more general contractors?
Say contractors.
Okay.
The third.
So they're third-party contractors.
Yeah. I don't know.
That's,
I
as
would-
lawyers, that's pretty well understood, I think, but
I think if you want to avoid getting into too many details about what a third-party contractor is or not, usually if they're not an employee, an actual employee of the nonprofit, then they're employed by a third party. It could just be a third party. Charter schools, well, anyway, see if somebody else has thoughts. Maybe I just opened up a Pandora's box, but I just don't want 417 to be in there at this point. So we want to get these rules moving.
Okay, Board Member Brittany Cummins.
Sorry, if we used third-party contractors, so is it implying that this policy would be regard to all contracts? So who you submit was your lawn care contractor, your...
Well, when it comes to this, they'd only have to have a policy regarding their contract employees who are their executive director or business administrator. So some charter schools do have an internal executive director and business administrator that's an employee of the nonprofit, and sometimes they have their executive director or business administrator hired by a third party, their service provider or whatever. So this just simply states, because and I'm trying to get back to why we even put this in to begin with. There's been times where a charter school, a new charter school, we as the staff who support and oversee compliance, and we need data, financial data, et cetera, we don't know who to contact as their business administrator. And if the business administrator is hired by a third-party contractor, we either need to have something official so that if Natalie needs to talk to the business administrator, that she could talk to the contractor versus trying to get either the charter school president, their chair. There's some history here where contractors often, the service providers, want to provide data or kind of act as the business administrator, but we don't have an official anointing or appointing of that person. So this would give them the authority to do that. They can appoint a contractor as their business administrator, which I don't think currently has been codified and has pros and cons. I don't know if it has cons. I think that's only pros. Is that correct, Natalie? Why we wanted to clarify that they at the very least need to have an executive director and a business administrator. And because somebody asked, well, if you say that, but you don't explicitly state that they can be contract employees, it could create problems, because originally the language just said the charter school has hired an executive director and a business administrator.
Okay.
So.
Just trying to read through really quick to make sure that I'm on the same page.
Okay.
I think that some of the context that Angie's talking about is, I could give you lists of board chairs or executive directors who have contacted me and said, my school didn't do that. Why are you emailing me asking me why we did this? Or why are you guys saying we're not in compliance with something? We didn't do that. And it's because they're not monitoring or supervising the people that they've contracted to provide services for them. And especially as we're now potentially putting into this rule standards for financial and operational things that need to be in line before a school opens. I think what we're trying to do is create a link that the governing board of a new school needs to set up policies and practices for monitoring their third-party contractors. Just like we're asking them to set up policies and procedures for procurement and student enrollment and their lottery and things like that. This is one of those elements that we feel is critical. It's an internal control piece that we see could be improved upon. And we want to make sure that all of our new schools and all the authorizers are focusing on that, as well as the other things that are going on as they're opening schools.
Okay, I have a question with that, and my brain, I think I'm finally waking up. I'm reading that, and it has to do with in accordance with Rule R277417, and I'm remembering that that's new language, I believe, in Section 5 of that rule, which we've yet even approved.
That's why I wanted to strike it.
That's why you want to strike it. Mm-hmm. My brain, yeah, seriously. Okay, let's strike it. I'm good. Board Member Belknap?
Thanks. I'm just, Chair, may I ask a question of someone in the audience?
Yes.
Chris, do you have any comments on this?
Number 4.
On striking
I told
this?
you we were going to put you on the hot seat.
Chris Blake with Utah Association of Public Charter Schools. I think this is a great change and goes to what we talked about in the stakeholder meeting in terms of trying to install the link between what Natalie just said, that the board has actually designated somebody and that it didn't necessarily have to be the employee, it could be somebody else. I don't love contract employees in 106. You struck that in 108, Angie, and employee seems like a loaded term to me, so that they.
Oh, okay.
So that would be the only thing, but I think the discussion you guys have had comports with what we talked about in the stakeholder meeting and establishes, formalizes the practices that have been going on, but adds this important step that the governing board has to designate these people. And then it's clear for Natalie or staff or anyone else that's working with them that X school has actually designated this person to be my business administrator, and it allows Natalie and her team to then work with that person because they have been designated as such.
What do you think of that? Employed by a third party?
Said the business administrator employed by third party.
Yeah, it seems,
Should it be and or?
No, it's and.
Or, so executive director or business administrator. So they don't have to do them both. It could be, and that's I'd say the more likely case. Most of the schools, not all, but most of the schools have an executive director who's an employee, and business administrator is a little bit more fluid. There are many service providers that do that, although there are a number of schools that do actually hire a business administrator as an employee.
Thank you. Appropriate there.
Okay.
That could be. So that could be, you could just call it amendment number 4 if you want to not state it all, and that's it.
Okay. Board Member Brittany Cummins?
I move Angie's Amendment 4.
Okay, so the motion before us is to move Angie's Amendment 4. Any discussion? Okay, let's vote. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Oh, he's trying to take a picture.
Go.
So then this would be draft 3 that we would pass to the board, right?
So yeah, you would approve draft 2 as amended with all these
Okay.
amendments, and then on first reading, and recommend that the board approved draft 3 on
Okay.
second and final reading.
So are there any other amendments? If not, then I'm seeking a motion for the rule. Board Member Brittany Cummins?
I move that we approve draft 2 as amended of R277552 and recommend to the board to approve draft 3 of R277552 on second and final reading.
Okay, so the motion before us is to approve R277-552, draft 2 as amended, and recommend to the board draft 3 to be approved on second and final reading. Any discussion? Okay. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Okay, motion passed unanimously. Item 2.4, R277553.
Okay, so 553 would be the rule that governs specific provisions related to an authoriser's oversight of its schools. Talks about regular review of those schools, having policy for remediation and probation when there are issues with those schools, as well as other training and compliance with the law that's required. So we'd be happy to answer questions you have regarding 277-553.
Really interesting question when she calls on me.
Sorry. Board Member Warner?
Out of curiosity, why are we not just fixing Rule 481 and 482? Why are we putting whole new numbers on them?
We decided to kind of, because we were moving different parts of the rules into
Okay.
different rules. So I think you'll see, like with 470, like while most of it went into 551, some of it went into 554, and so we were breaking it up a little bit. And we also decided there would be good sense to put the charter rules all together in a different
Okay.
place.
Just
And
curious.
Angie had specific reasoning why she used that numbering as well. So that was the reason.
The other reason is we've got 3 rules that are going to need to be repealed essentially at the same time. And also historically, for some reason or another, Chapter 5 in the code, it's currently Chapter 5 in the code that governs charter schools. So I just thought it was nice to have that 5 continuation, because they used to be 53A1A Part 5. Now they're Chapter 5 in 53G. So.
Okay. And then we have public comment. Royce, did you still want to give public comment on this rule?
Before he provides comment, there was one change that was
Yes.
recommended. So staff, again, based on this Rule 277-100 that will be coming and the clarifying of audit versus monitoring, et cetera, there's a term on line 108 where it says audit, where we think it should, so can you show 108, Ben?
Mm-hmm.
So right now it says superintendent and authorizer shall direct an independent review or audit as appropriate, and that should be direct an independent review or monitoring as
rather
appropriate.
than-
So to just strike the word audit and put monitoring. And that would make it consistent with the terms we'll be using in a moment in 100.
Okay, Royce?
I think all of you have seen the email that I sent out with several questions about this. The question about full compliance does go to an issue that we amended that basic notion out of an earlier rule that was in here, and so you may want to think of that in the same context. That's line
Line 58.
55. Yeah,
Oh, I see it in 58.
Sorry.
Oh, okay.
Don't have my glasses on. And then, I'll let my email speak for itself, but I know that Ben and Angie have considered those. We weren't able to talk through them back and forth, but I think I'm comfortable that they understood. If they hadn't, they would have shot me an email or given me a call. But these are perhaps hyper-technical concerns, but rules I think we ought to get hyper-technical with, make sure that we get everything right. So those are my only thoughts.
Okay, thank you, Royce. I see also in your email that you have concerns with line 64 and 77 where it says all of. Okay. Same issue, okay. Okay. Any ideas? Board Member Belknap?
I actually, because I've been in this case where the terms are written such that they have to comply with all of them, I really don't have a problem on 64 when they're on probation. So, but I do appreciate the other one, 58? On, where was it?
58, just strike the word full. Is
Let me just see.
Is that what you had said, Board Member Belknap, is strike full?
No, not yet. No,
Okay.
I'm just checking it again. I think in this case, we might be stretching past what their probation parameters were. I don't have a problem with the other one because when at least 10 years ago, Jen, I don't know how long, 5 years ago, that was very clear you had to do this, this, and this. And it was very clear you had to do all of those things. But I think this is now getting into rules and laws and regulations that they maybe not be able to get into full compliance with on 58.
Okay.
So I don't know what kind of word, or you just take out full and just leave compliance.
So is that what we would do, Ben, is strike out full?
Yes.
So it would read not in compliance and striking out full. Okay.
And I would also, if anyone wants to give me a different background on the other one, I don't see any reason they shouldn't do all of them once they've been on probation, because it was very clear, you do this to this, to this, to this, in how the probation, how to get out of probation was written. It's, what line is that?
64, and then
Yeah.
it's again in 77 or something like that. I'm trying to, let me go back to the email.
But they're very clear about what their terms are when they're on probation. That there's no waiving.
64 seems like
It's every bit.
With the terms, that means.
Right, with the terms would mean the same, would it not?
But do they need, I would question, do our authorizers need, that they need to do all of the terms they've set out?
I would think if they've put out terms, it would mean, it would be understood all of. I don't
think we, I have a question.
Yeah.
On a plea in abeyance, I'm looking at one of my plea in abeyances, pleas in abeyance, and I don't think we put all of, we just say the terms and
Right.
conditions. I'm gonna look and see.
I don't think that removing all would matter. To me, that's the same thing, but.
And just saying,
If there's a preference there, I don't think it would matter.
if the school complies with the terms of the written plan.
Yeah.
So that would be in 64
alls.
and 77.
77.
I believe it's also in 77.
An authorizer shall
Wait,
comply with the notification requirements.
hold on. It's somewhere else.
It is
64.
You know where it is, Royce?
Oh, and 68.
Oh, 60.
That's what I had to do.
Same thing would apply.
I need like 3 monitors.
I know.
Question?
Yes.
I'm back to this again, and could use a nod of the head. So in the terms that are written, there are timelines and there are requirements. If we don't put all, are we still okay, Jen? Because you can put that in as part of the probation. Is that okay, Chair?
Yeah.
I want to make sure we're not handcuffing them to do their job, to put somebody from probation to, what's the next?
Closure.
Parole. Parole. Thanks, Jen. Thanks, Chair.
So I think it depends upon what you are seeking. By taking out the word all, you leave it up to the authorizer to make those calls and to work with the school and make those decisions. If you have all, then it would tie our hands to all.
So taking out all of frees you to
That's how
work
I
better
would see
with the
it. I would
schools.
defer to the attorneys, but that's how I would.
To me, it's the same either way.
Okay. Okay. So I guess we need motions for all of those things. I wrote them down so I can make them, but if somebody
So
else-
moved.
Okay. So in line 58, strike out full. In lines 64 and 68, strike out all of. And then in line 108, strike out audit and insert monitoring. Are you taking a picture of my sloppy handwriting stuff? Don't pay attention to stuff on top. That has nothing to do with it. Okay. So that's the motion before the board. Any discussion to that motion? Seeing none, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Okay, motion passed unanimously. If there's nothing else, then I'll seek for a motion to approve the rule. I think so.
Yes, so, do you want to do this one?
Yeah, if I can see. I move to approve, I make a motion that we approve R277553 with the various amendments, draft 1 as amended, and send it to, and recommend that we send it to the full board for second and final reading.
Okay. The motion before us is to adopt R277-553 as amended, draft 1 as amended, and recommend to the board for approval on second and final reading. Any discussion to that motion? Okay, seeing none, let's vote. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Okay, motion passed unanimously. So now we're on item 2.5, R277-554. This is another new rule.
So this particular rule was extracted from R277-470 because it's two programs that are governed or that are run specifically by the state charter school board. So it's the Startup and Implementation Grant Program and also the Charter School Mentoring Program. We put these separately because it is that specific entity of the state charter school board that will administer and still govern these programs for the schools involved. And so if you open that up to questions, if there are any, about the requirements for those two programs in this rule.
We don't have any public comment. I know there's some people that came in after this was passed out. So if anybody, did you want to just like swing it through one more time? I don't know if, but I don't think anybody wanted to talk on this rule, so. I know. Yes, 554.
Of course you do.
Oh, no.
Uh-oh.
Too late now.
It takes you too long in board docs to find it.
Sorry if I can remember what my question was. So 39 to 40, a charter school shall pay grant funds to the state charter school board if recipients change to non-charter status within 10 years. Is this non-charter status reference, so if it goes from a charter school to a district school or a private school, is that what that is? So
Or a
non-charter
closed
status.
school?
Or closed as well, I think.
So if a charter school closes within 10 years, they are obligated to pay back the grant funds for,
Am I wrong there, Natalie?
this
She's
is
shaking her
the,
head.
Not if they close? Okay.
okay, so that's- okay, because this is startup
Yeah,
funds.
because now, well, how are you going to get it from
I
them if
know.
they float? That's the question.
Okay, so it's just if they go from being a charter to a district or a private
Right.
school that those funds are paid back. Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Okay. Board Member Warner, did you have anything?
Oh, sorry.
Okay. Board Member Belknap?
Yes, I'd like to make a motion.
Okay.
I'd like to make a motion that we approve R277554, draft 1, correct? On first reading and send to the full board for approval on second and final reading.
Okay, so the motion before us is to approve R277-554 on first reading, draft 1, and recommend to the board for approval on second and final reading. Any discussion to that motion? Okay, seeing none, we'll vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, motion passed unanimously. The last one of our new rules. 2.6, R277-555, corrective action against charter school authorizers.
So this rule is designed to outline the procedures that the board would follow if it needed to take corrective action against an authorizer for not following its processes. It largely is going to mirror the procedures that the board would take if it's taking corrective action against basically anyone under R277. Is 114, Angie? That's the corrective action rule. So we basically mirrored the language out of that. Same type of procedures that would be followed here. And so that was the gist of this rule.
Royce, did you have any comment on that, or you? Okay. 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 Yes, Board Member Brittany Cummins.
Sorry, I don't have specific notes on this one, but so we're going to go through the process of using the audit committee, et cetera, and so the corrective action, is it have the potential to be whatever the audit committee decides? I mean, it feels like the only thing that we can do with an authorizer, because we're not giving funding to an authorizer, it's not like an LEA that's non-compliant. You can't withhold funding. So really the only thing that the State Board of Education could do to an authorizer would be to say you can't authorize schools until you become compliant. And so I'm just wondering how this rule gets to that when we really don't have a lot of options of.
And we kind of discussed this. We were kind of in the same position as there's not a lot that you can do to an authorizer. That would probably be the prominent step you could take, is tell them you can't authorize schools. But I think the statute does give you flexibility if there was some other penalty that you thought were appropriate to impose that could work. I think the board would have discretion to use that. But I think the primary penalty that we thought about as we discussed this rule is what you're saying, taking away the authority to authorize.
And so that would be just that through that decision-making process after this all occurs, that would be the conclusion that the state board at that time would come to. Oh, you can't authorize, or permanently, or put for a time, or et cetera. So those would be part of that decision. Okay.
Okay. Any other discussion? Okay. Seeing none, I'm seeking a motion.
Lisa, it's your turn. I can do it if you want.
I move that we send R277 555 as written and amended to the full board for
Draft one
for
on first reading.
On first reading and
Recommend to the board.
I need to wake up too. Yes,
You want me
thank
to state
you.
it for you, Lisa?
Yes,
Lisa moves
I move.
that we adopt our
Adopt
277-555 draft one on first reading and recommend to the full board that they approve the rule on second and final reading.
Thank
Okay.
you. Second.
So the motion before us is to send R277-555 draft one on first reading and recommend to the board that they approve on second and final reading. Any discussion to that motion? Seeing none, we'll vote. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Okay, motion passed unanimously. Now we're to the repeals.
These ones should be easy after all.
I'm ready.
So 2.7, R277-470. We do not have any comment on any of these repeals. So
I'm ready.
yeah. Okay, Board Member Belknap.
Chair, I just want to ask too, is if we do these, would you find it appropriate to put these on consent calendar?
Oh, yes, I was
Okay.
going to ask about that, if we wanted to move those to the
That would be up
consent
to you,
calendar.
but anyway.
I'm good with that.
Okay, I make a motion that we repeal our 277-470 on first reading and send to the board for final reading on consent. Do I say it like that?
Yeah, how would we, and can we just?
And send it to consent, and
Yeah, you can put it.
R277-481 and R277-482.
Okay, so the motion before the board, before the committee, is to repeal R277-470, R277-481, and R277-482. Is
And send it.
Kathy, I think you'll want to make
And-
those separate motions in your minutes.
yeah,
Just one for each rule. You can vote on them all together.
and
but they
place on the
technically
consent calendar
separate for second and final.
for second and final for the board. Okay. Yes, Royce, did you have?
Oh, for Pete's sake, Royce.
I know, if you ruin our fast movement.
This is just a procedural question. We know that there will be some questions about what the board may do with 552, and I only wonder if you repeal these on consent and then 552 for whatever reason gets held up, what challenge does or doesn't that create? I don't know the answer to it, but it just seemed like a question worth asking.
Here. Ben?
I mean, we could readdress that and hold off on filing the repeal if necessary, if there was an issue with 552 passing during the
Okay.
committee report.
So if it's on the consent calendar and we find that we can hold off on the repeal.
So can I add that to my motion, that if 552 does not pass, that we don't file it until it does?
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Royce. Any other discussion to the motion? Seeing none, we'll go ahead and vote. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Okay, motion
Michelle,
passed
I was
unanimously.
going to
Yes.
say it. I would suggest we skip 2.10 until Angie's back, because she's the one that's going to need to address that.
Yes, she had asked if we could wait until she got back for R277417. So we'll move to item 2.11. I don't want to break, I want to go.
Take a break, Laura. There's a quorum.
So R277509, licensure of student teachers and interns.
So just a reminder, this is a rule that we're asking that be amended to include a sunset clause, but there had been a question about insurance being provided for student teachers that I think Brian is prepared to address today.
Okay. You can come and take Angie's.
Somebody just got unplugged.
No, it was
Oh.
unplugged. It
Okay.
was just, the cord fell.
Okay, hi, Brian, Quesamarie Legal Counsel for the board, and I looked up and found a statute. It's Utah Code 63G-7-1023A, and it's in the Governmental Immunity Act, and it specifically includes student teachers under the definition of employee, which means that they are covered by risk. So just as we would be as employees, so would a student teacher. That's what I wanted to add. My understanding, there was a question about risk coverage. So
What line is the new addition? Or
So it's the
is
very
that
end of
for
the
us to
rule.
decide?
Sorry. It's just adding
Right
a
here.
sunset date at the
Okay.
very end of the rule. The other thing that's in there you'll see is we've updated a few of the code references based on the recod, but you'll see on 53 through 55 that we've basically put a sunset date because of the new licensing system.
Okay. Okay. Any other questions? Let me see if we have any comment on that. Nope.
Okay.
We don't have any public comment, so. Okay, I'm seeking a motion. Who wants to do it this time? Board member,
She's got it.
I'll make a
Member
motion that
Warner.
we approve R277509 and send it to the board for second and final reading
You want
draft
that
one.
with draft one
You want that one on the consent?
on the consent calendar. Anything else I need to add to it?
Nope. Okay, so the motion before the board is to approve R277509
509.
draft one
As amended.
as amended, and then send to the board on the consent calendar to approve on second and final reading. Any discussion to that motion? Seeing none, we'll vote. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Okay, motion passed unanimously. Item 2.12, R277-100, definitions for Utah State Board of Education rules.
So R277-100 is a definitions rule that applies, basically establishes definitions that apply in all board rules. We got direction from the Eliminating Barriers Task Force to bring some updates to this rule, and so that's why it's back before us. Primarily, we started out by addressing terms related to audit, and so you'll find in here definitions for external audit, internal audit, for evaluation or review, and then for monitor or oversight. So those are the 4 categories that we're going to be looking to break these terms into as we're going through the rules later on. In addition to that, we've stricken the USOR out of our rules because we no longer have jurisdiction over that, and then we also added a definition for agency at the request of staff. So those are the definition changes that we've put in here, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have regarding this rule.
Board Member Belknap?
Yeah, I was talking to Angie before, and I think she had a couple more definitions that she wanted to add. So I don't know if we want to.
We were talking this morning about adding a definition for homeschool student, but she never gave me any final direction on that. We hadn't come up with the definition yet, so I don't think
Okay.
she was.
All right.
I don't think we were ready to do that at this point. We could revisit it later without much hassle.
Like, where would that be?
Just a definition
They're all
of what a
alphabetical, but
homeschool is.
it would apply to a number of other rules, and so there was talk of.
But I think that
centralizing
could
it there.
apply to 417 coming up.
That was part of the impetus for the discussion.
Okay.
So I don't know that I want to move on this.
Okay. So do we want to
We could take a break.
table that until?
The other agenda items.
The only other
and-
thing is the
and
board
you-
resolution.
She's the one that would be familiar with that as well, although you can discuss it if you, I'm not very familiar with that one.
So we'll go ahead and take a break. Okay. Okay, board members, committee members, sorry. We're going to go ahead and do R277100 since Ben has to be somewhere. Sorry. I don't have a gavel. I wish I did. It'd be cool.
If I may,
Fake one.
Chair.
Somebody give her a hammer.
Right? I do.
Use your water bottle there. So, just for the committee's information, I texted Angie. She is interested in adding a definition for homeschool, but we're not ready to add that at this point. We can bring the rule back at a future point when we have something ready, but we would like to get the auditing definitions in there approved so we can move forward on some other work related to that.
Okay. And then I just wanted to make a motion on line 20. I move that on line 20 we add the word grant between A and subrecipient. So to make it, is that what we said?
Yes.
Grant, to make it more clear. Grants, yes, sorry. That one.
So it would just read a grant subrecipient.
A grant subrecipient. Okay. So any discussion to that motion? Seeing none, we'll vote. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Okay, motion passed unanimously. Board Member Belknap.
Yes, I make a motion that we approve R277100 Draft 2 with the I guess I don't have to.
As
say that.
amended.
As amended on first reading and send to the board for approval on second and final reading.
Okay, so the motion before us is to approve R277-100, Draft 2 as amended, and recommend to the board for approval on second and final reading. Any discussion to that motion? Okay, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Okay, motion passed unanimously. Do we need to wait for Angie for the other two?
I'm not familiar with the other two things. I know very little about them, so
Okay.
I'm not able to give a lot of guidance on them.
Yeah, we could work on the resolution, couldn't we? Could we? Okay, we'll try. Yes. And we don't have our HE.
Okay.
So 2.13, it's the resolution that was brought before the board by board member Elisa Ellis. And do we want to put it?
Yeah, I'm just going to do that right now. Let's see. There we go.
Okay. Okay, so any discussion, amendments? Board member Brittany Cummins.
I would like us to consider, number one, the purpose of a resolution is to basically make a statement to the world and all who care that we care about something, that something is important to us, and we make decisions based on it. And so if we're going to create a resolution on parents' rights, then I think it should be more general. That I don't want to speak directly just to opting out of testing, that it just be a general statement that we recognize that parents have the most significant role in their students' education. And that's it. I think it's interesting. This current resolution uses a quotation from a Supreme Court case, which I believe has to do with custody, which is something completely different than, you have custody of your children and somebody else making decisions for your children, which is very different, if I understand that correctly. And so I think the use of that particular quotation may not be appropriate in this manner. And so I think maybe just starting over and talking about using what's in the Constitution and in the preamble to the Education Code, whatever that was written, that little snippet that's in the Education Code, and using that as our basis rather than this particular quote from a Supreme Court case. Those are my thoughts.
I think, at least for me, as far as the Supreme Court case, is that what this is saying is that we conclude that a parent has those rights, and that unless due process is done, rights cannot be taken from them. And so if they decide to opt out of state testing or whatever it may be until due process is done, I think that was the intent, but as to putting that in there. Because with a lot of the things that we do, we are essentially at some points sometimes taking away a right of a parent, and there has not been any due process that has happened. I don't know how to change it.
I mean, I think if there's, go ahead.
Board Member Warner.
I was just going to say the same thing. I'm a little concerned because this is based on a termination of parental rights issue, custody, and I don't really think we want to go in that direction at all. And I understand what she's trying to say, but I'm wondering, like Brittany, if we should go in a different direction where we're not starting with the premise that we're trying to terminate somebody's rights, parental rights, and move up from that way. If we're going to go forward, and I think that we need to have a little bit of a bigger discussion about what a parent's right to do in school is. If not just, I mean, maybe we want to look at something besides just out-of-state tests, or the opt-out of
Right.
state testing, and what the parental rights are. So I like the idea of kind of starting over. I think this is great, but when I look at it starting with the termination of parental rights, I'm not comfortable moving in that direction, because I don't think that's what we're saying at all.
Okay. Board Member Brittany Cummins, did you have anything more?
Yeah, because I mean, it implies that somehow, schools are actually taking children from their parents' arms, and terminating their rights as a parent, which is a totally different conversation to have, as we're talking about a parent has chosen to bring their student to school, and under that place, there's certain norms that exist in that place that that parent has chosen. That child was not torn from their parents' arms and put in a classroom, right? The parent chose to bring them there. And so it's how do we balance what it means to make that decision as a parent and to buy into this program, and then the flexibility that's within inside of those walls as a parent of, I'm choosing to be here, here's my rights and my opportunities within this boundary, and my ability to control and be the steward of my children's education, but recognizing that I don't have complete rights within those walls. I can't go into a classroom and say, I demand this right now, right? And so they don't have that right, right? They have the right to remove the child from the classroom and to do something different, right? Or not to sign up in general, but it's recognizing those boundaries that exist within the choice that a parent makes to place their student in public education in the first place. So I would like to come back and just recognize, and maybe we don't need a resolution other than just to reiterate what is already in state code, where we talk about that we recognize that a parent is that most important part of a student's education, and how do we support that in public ed, and how do we honor that that relationship and that commitment that we have with one another between a parent and their role as a parent, and then the role of public education and what it's there for.
So what would we like to do with this resolution? Do we want to?
Chair, if I may.
Yes.
Board Member Cummins, what I heard, and I understand what you said, but what I heard is that when a parent comes in to opt in to bring into their children into a public school, they are essentially giving up some of their rights of authority of what happens to that child, or how that child is taught, or what rules they are subjected to. In some part, I agree with that, because you're giving. You're not always going to be there with the child for discipline, so you have to give the authority over to someone else, or to grade, or whatever academic requirements are needed. But does that mean the overall authority is then given up? So I think from what I'm understanding with this resolution, is that that the right of the parent is not deprived, and that it is the supreme authority based on the Constitution and unalienable rights. And yes, I agree with the part that it should not be limited to the physical taken away, but it should also include I'm not formulating my words correctly this morning. It should also include and expand conscious rights. What am I getting at? Not physical rights, but also First Amendment rights.
Ben, did you have?
What I was going to suggest is perhaps it sounds like there's some feeling that maybe we could make this a little broader based and add a little to the
stronger,
a little more to the foundation as far as where these rights are coming from, other than just that one case, which is focused on custody. If that's the direction the committee would like to take, I would suggest that you ask staff to bring another version back in November. Give us some time to rewrite it, maybe strengthen it a little bit. And then we could bring the resolution back for further consideration in November, taking that feedback into account.
Okay, I'm good with that. Board Member Warner?
I really like this. When creating the United States Department of Education, Congress enacted statutory law that said basically parents have the primary responsibility for the education of their children, and that states, localities, and private institutions have the primary responsibility for supporting that parental role. I like that better than a termination of parental rights thing, that parents have the primary responsibility for education of their parents and that are of their children, and that we're to support that.
And I believe that's in our Constitution.
Yeah.
That we're educational agencies are second, or the state is second to the
Right.
parent, basically. Maybe we could state that.
Yeah, and maybe move that in, yeah. So I like the idea of maybe staff doing something and looking at it. I think that because this was from Board Member Ellis, we may want to include her in
Yeah,
that discussion.
I would. So if staff could reach out to Board Member Ellis and work on this, and maybe bringing in what's stated in statute. And then, but I agree with Board Member Brittany Cummins that it's broader than just testing. That it's more, encompasses more than just opting out of testing. So I don't want to limit it to just testing, if that makes sense. Board Member Brittany Cummins?
Yeah, and just that recognition of what, and like I said, I think this resolution isn't anything new. It's just a statement of we believe this. We recognize it, and that's what we understand as we make this policy, that we recognize that parents are the ones directing, that we are a support to families, that we provide this system, right? But it doesn't, nothing in this resolution is going to say that within those walls that the parent has the right to do whatever, or a student has the right to do whatever they want within that system, but they have the right to participate, or they have the right to not participate. And that is completely the decision of a parent and a family to make.
Of course, I find it interesting that if we decide not to participate, we essentially are actually have to ask permission of our local superintendent to then send us a letter every year saying that he grants us that permission to not participate. So
That's only if
it's
you
kind of
live
a
within
false
the outside
choice,
the
really.
district. Yeah.
No, if I'm homeschooling, I have to ask my superintendent, and I get a letter every year from my local superintendent saying that I'm allowed to homeschool. You have to send in an affidavit. So I'm essentially asking permission from the state to take back my right, and maybe we could look at that, because
That's a code thing.
right, that's a code thing. But I'm just saying, like, we have a choice to not do it, but we still have to ask permission. So it's kind of, I don't know, sort of, do we really have the right if we have to ask permission, I guess is my point. Board Member Lisa Cummins?
I'm gonna back off.
Okay. So, and I don't know, maybe code should be changed on that, because I don't feel like I need to ask my superintendent. Since, I mean, we're discussing this and we're saying that it's a parent's right, but yet I have to ask permission.
Work on that. This isn't ready.
Right. So we'll just send it back to, I'm just,
True.
Yeah, it's not ready, and we'll go back and then maybe look at other things. Yes.
So it sounds like you'd like us to work on a revised version with Board Member Ellis. Are there any other board members we should work on or work with on the resolution?
May I suggest Brittany Cummins? And I wasn't being facetious then either.
And anybody else that Board Member Ellis would have, I don't.
We could include
know.
you also as the chair. I mean, if you wanted, or,
fine.
you know, on preliminary drafts.
Yeah.
Sometimes it just helps for a board member, especially because Board Member Ellis isn't a member of this committee.
Right.
That somebody's following why maybe we did what we did with the draft. That's it.
Yeah. So I'm comfortable if Board Member Brittany Cummins, or if you're okay with working with Board Member Ellis on this, and then we can bring it forward. And then anybody else that wants to work on it, I'm not going to limit that, obviously. Okay, so that, do you have enough to kind of work on something?
We'll work
Do you have
on
a
it.
jumping off point?
Board members
Yeah.
Cummins and
Yes,
Ellis.
we'll work on that.
Okay, so now 2.10.
And down to finance.
R277-417, prohibiting LEAs and third-party providers from offering incentives or disbursement for enrollment or participation.
Might be
Okay.
good to start.
Yeah, thank you.
So as a reminder, back in June, this committee received reports on a couple of audits on Provo School District and Lumen, and related to that report out in discussion, the committee voted to direct staff to make changes to this rule, as well as 419 and maybe some others, which will also be coming, but we brought this one first. And maybe next month we'll also bring 419 before you. To update 417 related to the audits, and then also for your information, we've received a number of hotline calls, and when I say we've, internal audit, and then internal audit has worked with finance staff and myself on potential updates to 417 based not only on those audits but the hotline calls, and we've brought it to you for your review. And just also to summarize, this rule governs LEAs directly. It governs things that LEAs may or may not or should do. It does not actually govern the third-party providers. So I just wanted to give you that context when you're looking at everything that we're regulating here. The people that we would be going to ask for their compliance and how they're doing are the actual school districts and charter schools. This rule does not mean that we will be reaching out to the third-party provider directly, because I think that's been one question that's been asked. Another question that or maybe I should just go through and quickly summarize some of the major changes. So the first change, and Ben has left, so
Are you
I
on draft 1 or draft
2.
Draft 2.
So let me connect. I apologize. Let me get out of. I'll connect to the screen there so everybody can be following along. And yes, we'll be speaking to draft 2. Of course, it's going very slowly. There we go. All right. So I'll start with the first definition change, which really goes to the second definition change. But business services means services that are equivalent to the duties performed by a business administrator described in Section 53G 4303. So school districts are required to have business administrators. Charter schools aren't necessarily, and so as we talked about in, I think it was either 552 or 553, they can either appoint a business administrator directly or by contract. But whether it's a school district or a charter school, a school may choose to contract with somebody to provide some of those services. And if they do, that's where this new change in the rule would apply to them with respect to reimbursements and providing incentives and tracking, for example, whether a student is actually receiving instruction and how you submit that for purposes of generating a WPU. So now you'll see why we've defined business services. You come down to line 41. Third-party provider, prior to this draft, was limited to a third party who provides educational services only. However, it has been expanded to include business services or data submission services, because a lot of these, the language we're talking about in this rule are about LEAs providing incentives, reimbursements, money or materials, and instruction. And sometimes that's done through an educational provider, and then part of the monitoring of whether there's actually a student who's attending and, for purposes of continuing enrollment and generating a WPU, you could see where a business administrator who has the legal authority of overseeing the fiscal, what's being done on with the district's finances, and the data submission services. So when we're talking about data submission, we're talking about, is the student receiving services over the 180 days or the 990 hours? Are they a full-time student, a part-time student? Because you could have some students, for example, that dual enroll, and maybe they're only a public school student for half of the day, and they're a homeschool student or private school student for the other half of the day. It's part of getting all of that data submitted accurately to show that the student actually is receiving instruction to generate a WPU. And that is why the definition has been broadened. And I'll just state this as staff, we often get put in this, and I would add the board, in this position where the board is charged with general control and supervision of overseeing public funds and public education. And there are times where we, meaning the board, has to justify why we're sending certain public funds to LEAs based on, say, whether they have 100 students, 1,000 students, et cetera. And we've performed audits, and we've been audited or will be audited by the state auditor or the legislative auditor. So this rule is an attempt to set a standard that is clear. We've been asked to set clear standards by our LEAs about what the expectation is when whether they can provide, you know, $100 bonus or provide materials or laptops or whatnot, and what their oversight of those public funds are. So that is why we brought this forward. And so I just wanted to clarify also, again, third-party provider means a third-party provider that provides educational services, business services as defined by the business administrator, or data submission services on behalf of an LEA. So it would be those services that an LEA would provide. So an LEA would not be a construction worker or would not be an architect. An LEA does not provide legal services or banking services. It's really about those services that an LEA performs. So instruction, progress, academic progress monitoring, making sure that students are attending, and then submitting that data to the state for purposes of generating the WPU. So I think that on behalf of an LEA in that definition is very important, because, and then with respect to incentives and reimbursements, how they're monitoring whether that is being done. So for example, if you're contracting with Skyward, Skyward is not going to be providing money, laptops to students. So I say all of this because I know many people have talked about, well, now this governs our contract with Skyward, or now we have to monitor Canvas, or we have to monitor ABC software provider. Those software providers are not, they're not actually providing resources, or if they are providing resources, they are performing the services of the LEA, and this would apply to them. So if they're actually providing the instruction, they're monitoring progress, they're doing, the submission of whether the student has been in attendance for purposes of WPU, this would apply to them. All right, so then let's go down to the next changes, which start on 56 and 57. These changes were also part of the audit. Curriculum, it used to say exclusively selected by a parent, and then instruction not directly provided by, or not provided by the LEA. Through the audits, we've seen that some have stated that if they just simply state, here's a list of, instructional materials, software providers, laptops, Chromebooks, devices, and then that they have now taken part in the role of determining whether that curriculum or device is appropriate for the student. And so, and the reason why we changed to the is because we don't want to limit, as say, if a school community council says, we would like to now start using, and I'll use my own school community council in Draper, Mandarin Matrix to support our DLI students. It's not to limit maybe parent input on the LEA as what is appropriate for general curriculum or a new program, but to limit when really we're trying to describe the difference between when an LEA is actually providing instruction and overseeing the education versus simply providing materials, laptops, curriculum, software, and the parent is actually doing the instruction. And part of this, there's going to be a two-step to this, and we will need to define homeschool. And part of that is because I think in the olden days, and they weren't that olden, but say 10 years ago plus, homeschool people thought that's when you're instructed in the home. We now have a lot of public school instruction that takes place in the home. And so we need a new definition of homeschool. and a new definition potentially of public school student, because public school education can take place in the home. The question is, who is directing the instruction? Is the LEA overseeing it, or the school overseeing it, or is it really the parent assessed, parent driven? And that will be a discussion not for today, but I think it's all related, and hopefully helpful to give that context of some of the issues that our internal audit department is identifying through audits. Our audit committee has seen those, and then that we as staff are trying to give you options as board members on what standard to set. And again, instruction not provided by the LEA, not directly provided by the LEA. That's, again, there's this tension of when does instruction by a school stop and then it start becoming but it's parent-driven instruction, and then meets homeschool. So, and I'll keep going. Then in section 4, you can see that so something that we've seen in the audits, and mostly we're foreshadowing a next step, is, or we're trying to avoid maybe LEAs not staying on top of what could be a next step. You might have an LEA, a charter school or district, that contracts with a third-party provider to provide instruction to students. And then the third-party provider, in order to say not worry about, having licensed instructors, doing the background checks, providing curriculum that is aligned to the core standards, they might then contract with another third-party provider, say a private school, that then there's a question about whether that second subrecipient or second third-party provider is still required to adhere to all the laws and regulations that govern public school students. So do they still need to have licensed employees? Do their employees still, anybody in that school or that provider, need to have background checks? Do they have to have curriculum that is aligned to the Utah core standards? And so this is just also helping the LEAs understand that they may require their third-party provider to get approval from the LEA, and it's a may, it's not a shall, before that third-party provider then subcontracts with another provider. So they are subject to the oversight and monitoring, but if they want to tell the first third-party provider that they can't contract with the second one, that is a may, that they may prohibit them from doing it, and that they may require the provider to that's in 5. So the LEA may prohibit the third-party provider from subcontracting with another third-party provider or require them to get approval. And so part of this is, remember, we're talking about the instruction of our students. We're talking about whether or not the teachers are licensed, whether the curriculum is aligned to the core standards, whether there's background checks, whether they're following student data privacy requirements. We even have had a recent hotline call where a third-party provider won't give access to a parent to the records of that student, even though FERPA requires parents to have access to that data. And so it's just making sure the LEA is appropriately supervising and monitoring when they contract those duties out. This is a message sent to the LEAs. You are responsible for those duties, and you need to oversee and monitor them. The next section is a new reporting section that kind of goes to the next step of, first, you as an LEA set the policies, and then now we're looking at monitoring those policies and their supervision of those policies. And it allows those parents, members, taxpayers, members of the community to know which service providers LEAs are contracting with for these educational services, the business administrator services, and data submission services. So hopefully that is helpful. Again, staff was asked to write this rule based on audits, and that's why we brought it forward. And we're open to working with.
Okay.
May I?
We have some public comment, so I'll go ahead and then we'll go to public comment. Go ahead,
Okay.
Board Member
I have
Lisa,
mine.
and then Warner.
I'm going to go there. Reading the Communist Manifesto, it's about small incremental movements. And to me, this is encroaching in homeschooling. This is encroaching on parental rights, exactly what we were trying to protect through the resolution. I think if the State Board of Education has general oversight, and I think the general part should stay there. Any further infringement upon monitoring or assessing or gathering data with third party, fourth party, and then parents, and then requiring them to take the state assessment, requiring to know what's being taught, limiting what can be taught in the house, and now we're going to be bringing in the establishment clause, right, of what can and cannot be taught in the home based on the criteria of public funds being given through third parties. I am not for this at all.
Board Member Warner.
Well, I'm going in a different direction. This is the 8th time in 3 years that we've heard this rule. And I'm frankly thinking it's a witch hunt. I mean, I don't know another word for it. Because the 2 audits that we're using, one was done in November of 2016. The rule has been amended since then several times. And the other one was in the spring of 2017. The rule was amended after that. So I'm a little confused, and I'm not supportive of moving this forward at all, because this will be the 8th time, at least in the minimum that I wrote down, 8th time that we have discussed this rule. And it feels like we are targeting just a couple of LEAs, and I just, you know what, I'm just not going to go there with it anymore. I understand what the hotline call was, but we already have right now in the language that the third-party provider is complying with federal, state, and board rules. So federal law, state law, and board rules. If they're not giving somebody their information for their children, well, that's a violation of a federal law, and there are already remedies for this. To make this whole thing, when I read through this, oh my heavens, we could look at withholding funds because they don't have the start date and the end date of a contract, and it's not you. I just feel like there's a witch hunt going on for a couple of schools, so I'm absolutely opposed to this. So.
Okay. Did you have any comment, or
I
Brittany?
have a question, because I haven't been here as part of all the hundreds of updates over the last few years, or at least on this committee, so I haven't heard the discussion. But what we did hear a couple months ago was some concern, whereas charter schools that were kind of dinged on an audit became compliant, they felt like their ability to compete, in that market was diminished because they were being compliant and others are interpreting compliance differently. And so,
It's a compliance issue.
right, an interpretation of compliance. And so that's why the rule came, was to clarify a couple of points of compliance so that we inadvertently aren't harming the ability of a school to maintain its ability to be successful. And so that, rather than just completely throw it out and say, we've done this before, I'm just a little bit worried that those concerns aren't going to be addressed if we don't do anything. And I don't know if this rule really takes care of that entirely. But I just, understanding where you're coming from, just that, I just wanted to point that out. Okay.
Can I do a follow-up to Lisa's, Chair?
Yes.
You said something, Lisa, I just really want clarity on it. You said that this affects your ability, my ability, Michelle's ability in homeschooling. I don't understand how that would affect us in our homeschooling setting.
Right now, the way I understand it, that within our homes, parents have the ultimate authority over their child's education. But if they are in a position where those funds would help, say, buy Apologia, they can't purchase Apologia curriculum because it is Christian aligned. So it is then discriminating against what the parents deems as worthy of their child's education. and stops them so they can't do that. So there's already a hard stop with government funds in, purchasing that.
Okay, so,
So-
may I ask a question in between here?
Sure.
Okay, so my question would be.
And that's what they're going.
The difference between being homeschool.
Right.
Or public school.
Right.
Because as a board member, I am responsible for the funds that funnel through here, no matter where they're used, whether they're used in a home, whether they're used at school, and what's done with those. But if I want to homeschool, then I can choose whatever curriculum I want. I can purchase it. So
So then the statement of a parent's authority over a child's education, we don't believe in that.
No, I do believe in that, but that it comes if you, like when Brittany said, if you bring them into the school, there's also some boundaries within that.
So there's a hard stop.
Comply. Well, we have to comply with even contracts and all that kind of stuff. You have to, because we are responsible to justify what we have done academically and financially.
So then I would
with
say that
money.
that happens at the LEA level and not at the third-party level.
Exactly, and I think that's what this says. I said, I think this is what it says, that the LEAs are responsible for whomever they contract.
And they do that. And they do that from what I understand.
Well, they're supposed to. So whether they do or whether they don't isn't the question, but this requires them to make sure that whoever they contract, that they are following the laws, no matter if there's 10 people down the road that they contracted with this group, that this group is complying no matter who else they subcontract out to, that the LEA is responsible.
So then why are we checking on the third and the fourth contracts
What
and all
it's
of that?
saying is they're responsible no matter who if an LEA contracts with a third-party vendor, okay?
Mm-hmm.
The LEA is responsible to make sure that third-party vendor is complying with the laws of the state.
So we're giving up local control.
But I think what's happening, you're right. So, and maybe Debbie can do this better than I can, because I don't live here, but then if for example, if this third-party contractor decides to go somewhere else to get what I'm hoping this is, that they let the district know, or the LEA know, that they are changing their contract slightly. That's what's happening. They're not informing the LEA that their contract that they had to have has changed slightly.
Okay, I'm going to go to public comment really quick, and then we can pick this up. Because, Royce Van Tassel, did you still have public comment that you'd like to make? And then Stan Lockhart, you're on deck.
So I've spoken with most of you in some detail about these issues, and had a lengthy conversation with Debbie Davis a couple days ago, and part of the I think there's two significant challenges that we're looking at. The first is that it is at least a little bit unclear in the definition of third-party provider what the words "on behalf of an LEA" mean. I had spoken to and have showed this language in that definition to quite a few people, and Debbie was the first person to have laid some weight on that, and it just because it's a little bit unclear how much that is generally understood, and therefore, to Angie's earlier point about the extent to which a third-party provider goes beyond these, I think, more aimed at services. And so I don't know how to, we've spent a lot of time this past week trying to figure out what is a better way to come up with that definition, but it is very, very difficult. And some of the discussion you've had here has reflected that. The second point that I want to make goes to all of the items that are in subsection 5. It is difficult to see how any of the items in subsection 5 are not duplicative of what LEAs provide today to the transparency website. If I go there, I can find all of the contracts, all of the expenses that any LEA or any public entity in the state provides. This, if every LEA has to go through a process to upload that. It is not as simple as exporting the data and just automatically uploading it. There is some changes to formatting that inevitably has to happen, and I think every LEA in the state will say, we're more than happy to do that. We're completely supportive of transparency, but we don't want to duplicate those efforts. If we've been transparent here, it's hard to understand why we should duplicate that effort again. And I'll leave that at there. I know that there are others who have share those concerns and have some additional ones that you'll want to hear from.
Thank you. Okay, Stan Lockhart and then Matt Bowman, you're on deck.
Hello, board members. I'm Stan Lockhart. The title of this particular rule deals with incentives and disbursements. And I think Section 4 and Section 5 go far beyond that. And I'd encourage you that if we're going to go down that road, let's make it a separate rule. Transparency is important. We have other rules that deal with transparency. And this just goes far beyond disbursements and incentives. Second thing that the second input that we would give is that this rule has been scrutinized over and over and over again, even when I was on the school board. We've been trying to get it right for a long time. We're now expanding the scope of what we've been working on for a long time to encompass a whole new body of oversight and reporting. It just seems like there are going to be some unintended consequences. I'm going to guess that there's going to be some other audits that deal with it. That would lend itself to, again, creating a new rule instead of combining it with something that we've been working on for a long time. To line 56, My Tech High, I'm representing My Tech High right now. We have felt that the word exclusively is actually very helpful in that context. It depends on the meaning of the word curriculum. Maybe I could just read what it's. So an LEA or third-party provider may not use public funds to provide a disbursement to a student or the student's parent or guardian for, and then it has a list of things. But this curriculum notion, saying the word exclusively is an acknowledgement that parents do play a role. If you take away the word exclusively, parents play no role in this. It's clear that it's not the parent's exclusive right. That's not what it's saying. It's just saying that parents shouldn't be discarded completely. And so I'm a bit baffled as to why we're removing the word exclusively. Those are my comments.
Okay, thank you. Matt Bowman and then Terry Shoemaker, you're on deck.
Thank you. My name is Matt Bowman, and I'm a third-party contractor for schools. They hire me to operate a program for them. And so I just wanted to share a couple things, echoing what Royce and Stan and has already been said. LEA oversight of contractors is important. It's so important that I really think it should be a very clearly written standalone rule of LEA oversight of contractors. And if the board wants to go to contractors of contractors, fine, the board has that prerogative. But to bury those things under a very focused rule that, as Board Member Warner has said, has gone through 8 iterations, doesn't seem to make sense to put it as an add-on to something called incentives and disbursements. If someone was trying to look through the rules and saw prohibitions of LEAs and third-party providers to provide incentives and disbursements, they wouldn't think, this is how LEAs should govern all their contractors. It just doesn't seem to fit in that attachment at the bottom. And I think, if I said anything else, and just for the record, again, because there is sometimes misclarity, My Tech High program does not do disbursements. So even any of those things related to disbursements doesn't apply. We don't do disbursements. I just wanted that on the public record. Or incentives. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Terry Shoemaker, and then Elisa Ellis, you're on deck.
Is it still good morning? I think it is. 10 more minutes. Terry Shoemaker with Utah School Boards Association, Utah School Superintendents Association. As we discussed this with Angie and others, superintendents feel that this language is overly broad. Even though there was discussion of how to make it more specific, the discussion of that this is really just talking about those services that are provided for educational services. Well, everything a school district does is for educational services. So my concern is that it's still too broad still. Okay? That's one of the concerns we have with it. I'm grateful for the additional definitions and discussions about what business services means. Basically, they are responsible for every warrant in the school district. They're responsible with the board president to sign contracts. This is all contracts, even though this is only talking about those other types of educational services. Could it be interpreted to be beyond that? That's a worry for us. The language makes it difficult, even though you say that at the beginning, to supervise and monitor third-party providers for enrollment or participation. Well, I just think there needs to be a little more definition there and make sure that we clearly are talking about this type of provider, this type of folks that affect enrollment. That may help that a lot. And then lastly, we feel very strongly, particularly our smallest school districts, one more monitoring feature of adding to the website seems to be a burden that's unnecessary because you have to put that information on the transparency website. Thank you.
Then Elisa Ellis.
Hi, Elisa Ellis, State Board Member. I just don't get to be on this committee anymore. It makes me kind of sad. So it's true that when you're taking public funds, you're technically public schooled and not homeschooled. Some people are choosing to school at home. But I do think it's important to change that definition. But parents still hold the authority, the ultimate authority as defined in state statute, that they are the primary directors over their child's education. And I think that you can do that and still stay within parameter of the law. And it feels as if we have created this rule, and the history of it is I echo Terrell Warner's sentiment. It feels like it is a witch hunt. And so the thing that sparked this was a public audit by Lumen, and then there's been subsequent complaints that they had to comply with something and they feel like it's unfair that other people don't. Well, they can change their mechanism of how they were dispersing or reimbursing. And I think that it doesn't mean that we have to create a massive rule change for an entity to change how they operate. They can change how they operate and still be in compliance with the rule. And so I think it's not a good idea to just completely change this rule that is based on only general supervision and control. There's nowhere cited in statute that is specific direction for us to create this in the first place, and I take issue with that. I think that we need to be a little bit more considerate when we're putting extra burdens on LEA's backs, and it is their responsibility, and it is cited in code that they have to comply and make sure that they are responsible for their third-party providers. But it doesn't mean that we can just make up arbitrary rules because we don't like the way some LEAs are choosing to contract with third-party providers. And I think that the schools often approve their funds and things that are, it's been brought up in other committees, in audit committee or other places, that some people are concerned that this could be some sort of a liability issue where people are choosing third-party providers, but can't we just sign documents, taking the responsibility away from the state, like a liability document saying, by contracting with this or choosing this course, we recognize that, the schools are not held liable for injury. Anyway, so I think there's ways around it without creating this rule or changing this rule. I would like to see 417 evaluated to see if it even needs to be in existence in the first place. Because it does feel like a witch hunt, and I think instead of talking around terms, we should just be honest about who we're targeting.
Okay. Stay here. Thank you. Board Member Belknap?
Yeah. May I ask?
Yes.
Okay, a couple of questions.
I'm on the hot seat now.
No,
Just
because
kidding.
it's really general questions, and it's probably for the whole.
Right, no, please.
The whole body.
I was teasing.
Okay, I think one of my big questions is my concern is our background checks when they're not being done. I'm very concerned about that. So I just want that on record. I want to be very clear, this is not a witch hunt. This is very much, how do we track the money? We're responsible. We sit in front of the legislature and tell them where the money goes when we don't know where it goes. Does that make sense?
I understand.
So that's one of my problems. But I guess one of my questions is if I don't know. Can I invite Debbie Davis to the table?
Yeah, she actually
Can I
had something.
respond to? I mean, you didn't really ask me a question.
No, but I
you did ask
really
me to
was
sit
going
here.
to ask you a question, and then I thought it's really not for you. So
Okay, but can I respond a little bit?
You'll have to ask Chair.
Chair, can I respond?
Yes.
Since you invited me to stay, thank you. So on the money issue, yes, we're called to the legislature to account for funding mechanisms, but I think that we have a false. We forget where the funding's coming from, and really, we are responsible to the taxpayers.
I don't forget.
Well,
I don't forget where it comes from.
Well, but it seems like we do. We're constantly going back to bureaucrats to say this
Well,
is.
we have to.
We have to, but we can also put responsibility back to the people. And when people are choosing these programs or choosing an alternative route to education, a lot of the responsibility has to lie on their own heads, because we can't monitor everything. And when someone is choosing a different path, then the responsibility lies on them. And it's their tax on the person. Like if I'm a parent and I'm choosing this method of education that is outside of your normal scope of education, and it would be very difficult to monitor to the same level that you monitor in other areas. I feel like that some of the responsibility goes back to the person choosing to do that.
But we don't monitor parents.
Right.
Okay.
I know, but I'm saying it's an internal.
Well, I'm just saying that. Okay. So may I ask Debbie a question then, since we brought
Well, Board Member Warner, did you have a question for Elisa or?
No,
Okay.
I was just going to say first, I know that I don't always agree with Kevin and Debbie in audit, but I do trust you, and you have excellent credibility with me in terms that I know that you've done thorough jobs, and I know that you guys did a really good job, and we've done it again. It seems to me we've done a couple of audits with Provo and Lumen, which are attached here, right?
That's why I wanted her. Why are we back?
If I
Why
just
are we
put-
back? Yeah.
Okay,
Yes, this is exactly what I would like to talk about. This is fantastic because crazily, I almost think we're putting too much weight on the term audit and the audits that have been done based on where we are now. So back in 2013, before I was even here, actually, it was right as I was coming in, the former internal audit director and her staff, so Natalie Grange, was doing an audit of distance and online education, and there were some concerns that were identified. And so we went through a period of, well, we need to follow up, and there was some transition. As part of the follow-up, when I came on, and it was in 2016, so a few years later, we said, well, we're going to do this use of funds audit, and we'll also follow up on some of the concerns in 2013. So the follow-up meant that some of the schools where or LEAs where concerns were identified were also going to be included in 2016 follow-up. So that's where Provo, we did follow up with Provo. Lumen was new. We hadn't followed up. So just one audit of Lumen. And we looked at in this follow-up audit, and it was kind of a little bit of a different audit as well. That was 2016. We were looking at 2016 data. So the criteria that we used was the rule that was in effect, and 417 actually came out, there were 3 rules, it was one massive rule, and we decided that there's too much in that rule, and they broke it out for 17, 18, and 19. So they broke it out. So in 2016, when we're auditing, we took part of that broken out rule 417, and the rule that was in effect as of November 2015 was the criteria, because that's what we were looking at for 2016. So we did use the appropriate criteria for the time that we were auditing. That was done. But during our audit, we noticed there's still some concerns. There's still some problems. We think the rule, we probably should go back and look at the rule. And so that's what prompted the changes, and that's what's in the current rule, which I believe is March of 2017. Since then, the State Charter School Board has been doing follow-up. They said, okay, here's the audit. We want to make sure their corrective action took place. So they've been doing the follow-up. Audit hasn't really been involved other than kind of consulting and saying, you know, this was the audit, but now you move forward. So State Charter Board has brought some concerns. They brought concerns to the audit committee. We have had some additional hotlines. And so based on that, I think that's where we said, okay, well, we need to go back and I'll bring up our kind of audit accountability framework, as we've been terming it, design, implementation, and operating effectiveness. And it was before we jump in to do another audit or more monitoring, or before taking that action based on some of these concerns that have come up, let's go back to our rule, to what was designed, and see if it's doing what we want it to do. So that's why we're looking at the rule, just to say, was it designed well? Do we need changes? So we've proposed some changes. Absolutely, we need to get input, but we are trying to address concerns. We are trying to clarify, and I think that's the board's rulemaking authority, is to come in and say, is it doing it? If not, let's fix it. And yes, this is one that has kept coming up, but then education keeps changing as well, and so trying to stay up with that, there are things maybe we hadn't considered. So we're trying to consider that as we put this rule together. So that's kind of a background in where we are. I will say, as I went through and read this rule, it really, to me, and with my background, what we're talking about, and it's been mentioned, but maybe not in this terminology, is a subrecipient relationship. So for example, there's the federal government. They give the state funds. The state is the primary recipient of funds. The state, we pass that through to an LEA to run the program, because we're not going to run every education for all students in the state of Utah from this building. We can't do it. So they're going to run the program. That's a sub-recipient relationship. They're providing a service that we're not going to provide, and so there's some responsibility there. The feds actually came out with the federal government, and this isn't just education, this is for all grants and contracts. This is uniform guidance. They updated it in 2014 because they recognized that this relationship between primary recipients and sub-recipients is so problematic that they've expanded their guidance. There is more that we have to do as a state, and you'll see as our single audit comes out, we're working on it, but we're getting findings on this last year, this year. It's critical that we're getting it right. They think it's an area of extremely high risk. So we're not talking about state to LEA risk, we're talking about LEA to contractor risk. And so what needs to happen there? But what this rule does, and it's an incredibly narrow scope, that's been mentioned, and whether that's appropriate or not, I don't know, but a very narrow scope, talking about incentives and disbursements. So that's one lens that we view this through. And then also it's been brought up that we're talking about services in behalf of an LEA. So LEA, what services do they provide? Not the services they receive, but they provide. So that narrows the scope as well. it's a subrecipient relationship. So maybe as we're looking at the design, if we don't think this works, if we think, additional consideration needs to be given, I would suggest we have to follow federal standards anyway, and they have a pretty good, they have definitions of subrecipients and contractors, and making a case-by-case determination for every contract or legal instrument. They talk about how they have to do that monitoring, how we have to do monitoring, how an LEA has to do monitoring. So maybe we need to look at why do different things. Maybe we should do it all, but again, we're saying we want to get in front of this and talk about design before we take any other mitigating action going out and with LEAs. So that's a long way around. I don't know.
Okay.
Yes.
So this rule was brought, and we were told because of the Provo and Lumen audit, and apparently calls. So, but I'm a little frustrated, annoyed, because I've read the audit 3 times now, and nowhere in the audit do I see anything that pertains to the substantial changes of the rules, which have to do in 4 and 5. And so if I'm being told that this is brought because of an audit, but then the substantial changes have nothing to do with the audit, I'm like, it's just kind of like, then what is the actual purpose? I feel then that I'm not being told the true purpose for the changes of this rule. And I agree that those substantial changes in 4 and 5, they should probably be in a whole new rule. And I would almost say that all of 5 should just be struck out, because I don't see the point of it, since we have transparent.utah.gov, and I went on there and I was able to find third-party contract providers. I was able to find the funds that go to it. I wasn't able to find contracts, but if we're going to start putting out contracts, then let's do that for everyone, not just for a select few of third-party providers that we want to pigeonhole. And so I'm failing to see the point of the substantial changes when I keep being told it's the audit, but this doesn't have anything to do with the audit.
So maybe one clarification, is that okay? So I think it's stemming from corrective action that was taken on the audit. And again, that was kind of coming from the state charter school board, was the one following up with oversight. And so as they're looking at it, so it was part of that follow-up. So corrective action on the audit, I think that's part of it. And then also hotlines.
Okay.
So there's a tie, but it's not, I wouldn't say it's solely that.
The other thing that I'm just going to bring up, because I was trying to figure out where did 4 and 5 come from. So I'd been doing a little bit of research, and I found that in 2016, the language in 4 was actually brought forward to Representative Hilliard, I believe, to bring to the legislature, and then it was voted down. They didn't move forward with it, and I can see why. I mean, wow. And so I feel like I'm not prepared to do something that our legislators weren't willing to touch either. I mean, we've tried that route. The legislators said no. It's pretty convoluted. And I just think that, I mean, I've done a lot of lead work and asking questions to try to get down to the bottom of this, but if we're going to bring a rule forward based on an audit, I'd like it based on an audit and not have hidden agendas in it. And if there is another agenda, I'd like to be told. So anyway, that's just putting that out there. Yes.
Just a couple things. And number one, so first, the language that was presented through Senator Hilliard's bill a couple of years ago was actually about the board going directly to third-party providers and auditing the board. So Debbie going straight to My Tech High. And so this actually doesn't do that. This whole rule is about us monitoring the LEA. It's the school, either Lumen, Provo, Alpine. So Senator Hilliard's bill, I would just state that is not the same, because that explicitly stated the board. And in fact, we were told at the time the more appropriate way, and you can go listen to public testimony actually, that legislators said, we think board, your role is to oversee the LEA. And that's how you should do this. And I could be misremembering, but they even stated if the board wants to set up rules that govern how contracts are created, how LEAs govern contracts, that's appropriate. The second thing I just want to bring up, because Brian brought to my attention a section of code that I don't know if people are aware of. So we do have meaning the board, I don't. The State Board of Education has the authority, of course, to oversee public schools. And through the Constitution, as well as 53E-3-401, which is anything that the code, anything over schools, we can direct rules over what's in 53E, F, and G. But there's also a section of code that governs you as a public entity and us as public officers and LEAs as political subdivisions, that they also need to make sure and be overseeing that anytime they're giving money to, and this would be 1A, for the benefit or the use or benefit of another without authority of law, that we all need, again, this kind of goes back to, and as policymakers, you all absolutely have the authority to set the standard. And I hope you understand that we as staff get mixed messages from board members. We have some board members in audit that say make sure and monitor compliance, make sure that money is being used lawfully. So we have no malintent. There's no hidden agenda. We just want to make sure that you as a board and us as an agency aren't going to be called upon by the federal government, the legislature, to say, State Board of Education, you're not doing your job. You're not making sure that the public money is being used appropriately. And again, this rule only governs LEAs. It does not, maybe it governs third-party providers in the sense that we're selling LEAs. Make sure that your third-party providers are following the law, but that is the way it should be. The LEAs, these are core functions. I think when Terry Shoemaker was up here, he talked about business administrators being responsible for overseeing all the contracts of the school district, making sure that fiscal responsibility. I would say those are core functions that if you're contracting out all of that authority, you want to make sure that they're doing a good job. So, and again, we're just trying to set the standard so that then when either we, the superintendent, go and do corrective action against an LEA or the state charter school board or other authorizer tries to give direction to their charters, some of them are getting pushback and saying, no, we are in compliance in the law. This is our interpretation. And sometimes we have a different interpretation than they do. And so we're bringing those discrepancies to you all to make the determination of what that interpretation should be. And then once you make that interpretation, we will follow it. We will march forward.
So I'm wondering if maybe we need a separate rule then and not put into this rule, because it does seem like then it has to do with third-party provider. Like, I just think maybe separate that out for contractors. Board Member Warner, and then...
Sorry. Go ahead. I'd like to make a motion, so if you have a question to follow.
Did you have a question before?
Well, no, you said Brittany first.
No, I'm not in charge.
Oh, okay. No, so
Well,
an
she wanted
LEA,
to make a motion, so we might want to
don't they review the contracts? Doesn't an LEA review a contract?
Yes.
Okay. And doesn't their local board approve that contract?
Yes.
So if their local board is approving the contract, I'm back to what Elisa said. Why are we spending so much time on this when a local board has already approved all of this and moving forward? So, okay, I just want to clarify that.
So I'm going to share the intent because there's 3 different motions that I'd like to make. So the 3 things that I think we need to do are, number 1, before we even pass any of this, is we need to define homeschool. And I think that needs to occur because I think one of the lines that we're trying to inadvertently thing is, are we homeschooling or are we not? And so I think we need to define homeschool. One of the motions I'd like to make is to remove Part 5 of this particular rule because of its redundancy, but then take Part 4 and create a new rule that governs these relationships, because I think you're right that LEAs do have contracts, but anytime you have that contract, there needs to be some information on subcontracting, right? So there has to be some type of a relationship where in that contract you state that I'm contracting with you with the understanding that you will be following state law, and anyone that you subcontract with will also, down the line, 10 subcontractors, everyone has to be compliant with state law. And I know it's like a no duh, right? You need to be compliant, and you as the LEA need to know that. And so I think within that governance, there has to be a pushback so that if there's changes to subrecipients somewhere down the line, then the LEA needs to be informed. They need to know that we're not using this one anymore, we're using this one, so that not because we're trying to monitor all those bazillions of subcontractors, but we need to have the assurance, because that LEA is liable for student safety, they're liable for those funds that are being spent, they are liable for those things. And so they just need to have the assurance that I know what's happening. It's because anytime you contract, all of a sudden you give a little bit of your authority, your understanding out to someone else. And so whenever they're going to change or do something different than what the original agreement was, you should be informed of that. You should know that, okay, we're shifting our subcontractor over here. And yes, here's our assurance that these two, we've made some assurances that they're going to follow state, federal law, rule, everything else.
So then do we want to make those motions, separately?
So I can...
Or do we even mess with the rule and just leave it the way it is?
So I do not want to make a motion to pass the rule at this moment. I'd like to make some committee motions, basically, that wouldn't go for the full board.
Okay.
So I move that for our next committee meeting that we have a definition for homeschool. Okay. Do you want me to do them all separately?
Let's do them separately. So the first motion is for the committee, this is just a committee motion, for staff to come back with a definition for homeschool. Any discussion to that motion? Seeing none, let's vote. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Okay, motion passed unanimously.
Okay. I move that, so I don't want us to pass R277, whatever we are on. 417 yet, because I think some things with that definition are important. But I do, when we get the draft back, I'd like Section 5 to have been removed.
Okay, so the second motion is for staff to remove Section 5 when it comes back of R277417. Any discussion to that motion? Yes.
Can I amend that to also include that we leave 56 and 57 alone and leave it the way it was?
I'd like to split that.
56 and 57.
Let's
split.
So let's,
okay.
Because, I'm in agreement with that. Okay, so all in favor of the motion of taking 5 out? All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Okay, motion passed unanimously. And then, did you have a third one, or did you want to go to?
I do have a third one. Okay. The concept of Section 4, which is LEA supervising and monitoring third-party contracts, come back in the form of a new rule. Being careful as we talk about that it really is contract-driven and compliance-driven. And so it's like, the assurances that need to come back to the LEA sorry, I hate it when people make motions that are 10 miles long, right? But just that concept is in there, that it's about compliance, and that the assurance to the LEA that compliance is taking place within all services that are provided to students.
Okay, so then the motion is to direct staff to take that new Section 4 and create its own rule with making sure that it has to do with compliance to the LEA and everything else that she said. So, any discussion? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, motion passed unanimously. And then Board Member Warner, did you?
Yes, I want to make a motion. I want to make a motion that we leave when we come back, when we bring it back as an example. So I have two motions. One is that we leave 56 and 57 alone and just leave it the way it is.
Okay. Well, the motion before us is to leave 56 and 57 as it is. Discussion to that motion, Board Member Brittany Cummins.
So I just have a question. My brain has a hard time seeing these things independently. So an LEA or third-party provider may not use public funds to provide a disbursement. And so my question is the difference between a disbursement and a reimbursement, which are, I think, two different things that need to be clarified.
Well, disbursement is defined in lines 24, 25.
Right. And reimbursement is very different.
Oh, 19.
My understanding, anyway.
19 through 20. Do you want me to read it to you? It's in lines 19 through 23.
Yeah. So disbursement means the payment of money or provision of other item of value greater than $10 per school year offered as payment or compensation to a student or to a parent or guardian for. And then it has all that. Okay. And then.
So I guess my question then, as we go back to 56 and 57, thank you, is when you get to the word directly, so instruction not provided by the LEA. So an LEA third-party provider may not use public funds to provide a disbursement to a student for instructions not provided. So I'm just wondering why remove the word directly?
Remember, Warner?
Because it's focusing on the third-party vendors, basically. So the instruction may not be provided directly by the LEA. It may be provided by a third-party vendor. So I just think if we take out directly, it just says instruction not provided by the LEA.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
So my question as I read through this, and I don't know if it's what Angie might be thinking as well. So we're focusing, the question's on the where we may not use public funds, but there's also on line 63, 64, 65 down there, it says an LEA may use public funds to provide curriculum and, in accord, if it's available to everyone and if it's authorized by the student's college and career readiness plan. And I would think that would cover the majority of services that are being provided by an LEA. It would allow for parental input. So I think the may captures the majority, and so I guess, how much is this may not really covering? And are we kind of splitting those two? Are we understanding it's not siloed? There's not only this may not. There is a may provision in how funds could be used.
Okay. Yes.
And I was just going to maybe state that if you just decide right now, I don't feel like we've actually talked about personally why we were pulling out exclusively and direct, because I think it does warrant a larger conversation, and maybe that be part of 417, because at this point you've pretty much taken out everything else but 56 and 57. That will be the discussion if we bring 417
No, we
back.
looked at
we
17
have
and
to
18,
also.
the definition.
And we have to bring it back for
Well-
the definition of homeschool. So there'll be more of a discussion
Well, I'm
as
just
well.
saying that those definitions now of business services and third-party provider that are changed here might actually go in that new rule now. Do you see? So, and the homeschool actually may not be most appropriate here. I would argue it probably should go in 100 because, if we do everything that you're directing, most of everything except for 56 and 57 will actually be in either 100 in this new rule. So you may just want to talk about that. I think Debbie's correct. There's a reason that I don't know if we have talked about yet and what the wording is, and maybe we just bring different words, but.
I just think we just got done talking about how parents have the inherent right, but then we're going to strike out exclusively selected by parents. So do they have the inherent right or not? I'm just saying.
Okay, so I would like to have that, I'd like to make a motion that we take those, that we leave those 2 lines alone, and we can have a discussion further if you want, or we can kick it down the road, but I just would like those taken out.
Okay, so the motion before us, did you have any? Well, the motion before us is to keep 56 and 57
the way it is.
The way it is, without the amendments. Any discussion?
So this goes back to the question of homeschool versus public school, because if you have the word exclusively, right, and somebody can correct me if the words are getting jumbled in my mind, but if you leave out the word exclusively, then it gives an opportunity for parents to say, I can choose whatever I want. Like, out of the deep blue sea, this is the curriculum I want. Now you, LEA, have to pay for this curriculum that I found. So it's not...
Because it's been in there and we've not had that problem. And
is it the other way around?
It's the other way around.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, this rule has had exclusively in it for a while, actually. So
that's my motion, and then I have a second one.
Okay. Any other discussion to that motion? Seeing none, we'll vote. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed?
No.
Okay.
I just want to have a bigger discussion on it.
Okay. Well, did you vote? Aye. Oh, okay. So the motion passed 3-2, and then we'll have, can we just bring that for discussion further at the next meeting?
And then my other motion is to direct, because this is the second time that Debbie has brought up the federal guidelines. It would be really interesting to have you take a stab at making that rule of Section 5 based on a little bit of those federal guidelines.
Yeah. That new stuff, wouldn't it be Section 4?
I mean, Section 4. Yeah, Section 4,
Yeah.
not Section 5. We're not going, well, yeah, we voted to not have that. So.
Yeah. Okay, so the motion is to direct Debbie to look at the federal guidelines and work it into the new rule for Section 4. Yeah. Okay, any discussion to that motion? No? Okay. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, that motion passed unanimously. And then Board Member Belknap?
Yep, I have another motion and that I would like to have a clear definition of what a course is versus what curriculum is.
Okay. So the other committee motion is to have a clear definition of what course versus curriculum means.
And may I speak to that?
Yes.
I think there might be some other words that we'll have to define along the way with those, but those are the 2 I have right now.
Okay. Any discussion? Yes.
Nope.
Oh.
That's how you type it.
Okay. All right. Seeing no further discussion, we'll vote. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Okay, that motion passed unanimously. And this is just committee motions, so nothing's going to the board. Just want to clarify that. Board Member Brittany Cummins.
And I just want to clarify, because I know there was an intent to certain words that were changed, and we haven't had that full discussion of what is it that we're trying to get at. And so if staff can figure out, like if they do have some recommendations of here's what we're trying to fix, and we found it, right? We found the words that are going to communicate that they can bring those forward. I would say it doesn't have to be a motion, but just that with that understanding that staff is open to make recommendations based on feedback from stakeholders, et cetera, to really get to the point of getting to the concerns that were brought up to the audit committee. So,
okay. So does staff feel like you have a good direction? I think we were pretty specific. Okay. Okay. Well, that's everything on our agenda. So meeting is adjourned.